15th, 2014 meeting of the Shelburne Development Review Board. First part of this meeting, open it up for public comment. If anybody has anything that is not on the agenda that they would like to address the board.
Just wondering if those are very impressive theatrical microphones right there in front of you. Are those microphones?
They are.
Yeah.
But I'm not altogether sure.
Are they working?
Are they
We're
working?
They're
not
for
here.
for TV only.
Yeah, those are the broadcast.
I will do my best to speak up. Well, why don't you move up
That would
front?
be so nice, thanks.
You can always move up front.
My aides are on order, I say.
Okay. Move to the head of the class. That's all? Okay.
That's cool.
So, I would also ask that if you're here and you're going to speak, please sign the sign-in sheet. And if you're going to speak to anything on the agenda, I need to swear you in. And I guess that's all. So, the first item is a design review application, DR 13-16. It's for the town of Shelburne. It's for the Veterans Memorial Committee. The application for a memorial at 2 Church Street, which is in the parade grounds adjacent to the church. Is there anybody here for this application?
Mike Lynch was supposed to be here, he should be here. I'm Sam Feidelberg, I'm on that committee.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
a fundraiser.
I need to swear anybody in who's going to speak to this. That includes Annie, so please raise your right hand. I hereby swear and affirm to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury.
I swear.
Annie?
Yeah, this is an application for a new granite Veterans Memorial. It's going to be located at the east end of the town parade ground. It's going to propose to be a star-shaped monument surrounded by a brick plaza and landscaping. There will also be some park benches in the area. And the Historic Preservation and Design Review Commission considered this application at several meetings. And on the meeting of January 9th, they approved, or they recommended that the DRB approve the application.
Okay.
And that is it. And then the packet includes the design that you received.
Okay. Do you have anything you'd like to add to the
Well, we've gone through the other committee this past week and worked out all the concerns that they had and discussed the foundation and the monument itself and location, and was approved, and this was the next step.
Okay. Any questions from board members regarding this application? This was in front of us some time ago when they first were talking about this.
Don't trip up.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions for Annie. Annie, in your staff notes, two things. One says the landscape architect still needs to finalize the landscaping details, and I'm curious if that's been finalized. And the second question is, the Design Review Committee says there'll be a later discussion regarding the ground cover and tree details. Are all those taken care of?
I believe they'll be coming back for a second approval. Is that the case in that? Yeah.
Okay.
So what you'd be approving now would just be the monument itself and the brickwork and the granite portion.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board members?
I have a question about the site plan, not the applicant, but the rest of the site plan. Is this approved, or is this
The master plan?
right, or is this something that I hadn't seen it?
I saw the presentation on the master plan to the select board, and I can't honestly tell you where they are with that. I don't know.
But we're not discussing any of that this evening anyway.
Not as far as I can see. I think based on what the staff report says, it's talking about by and large, the layout, just and the features of the monument itself, and the benches and brick pavers surrounding it.
And make one further comment, if the board is not concerned with the landscaping, maybe adding a condition that this can just be handled from here on out with the design commission. Or I don't know, it's up to
Design
you.
review.
Design review.
Okay,
Because they will need to go back, it sounds like, for the landscaping.
right, I mean, that's part of the draft and decision that we've got here. Sounds like they're going back anyways.
I just had one quick question.
Okay.
So, the conceptual design says 8 park benches, and I looked around and I'm seeing 3.
Yes, we reduced it to 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 8 was a little overdoing it. And the park bench is the bench preferred by Shelburne.
Oh, okay.
Any other comments or questions? Go ahead, Bill.
I just wanna, I'd love for the public to be able to see this design. I think it's an attractive design. Where do we stand about, projecting these images of applications like this?
I didn't set up the projector for the meeting tonight.
I know we haven't done that in a while. Is there a plan to do that down the road again?
We can talk about that if all the board members feel that's a good idea. Sometimes it gets in the way, so I don't, it's just kind of awkward.
Mhm.
There's not a really good place to project it.
Right, okay.
How about the public? Does anybody from the public here have any comments for this application?
Would you like a motion?
If the board would, the pleasure of the board to make a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve design review application DR 13-16.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You're all set, sir.
Thank you, we appreciate it.
Thank you, and good luck.
The modest design will fit the park nicely.
I think so.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda is another design review application, DR 1324, by Pill Maharam Architects at 53 Falls Road, modifications to previous approval for exterior renovations. Is somebody here for this application?
No.
No? Okay. Annie, if you could key this up for us, looks pretty,
This is before the board, I think, only a month or two ago,
Yep.
as a design review. The applicant went back to the Historic Preservation and Design Review Committee to, I believe, change some of the windows and, the roofing material. The committee approved the change of the windows in the rear of the house and, left it up to the applicant as to what kind of roofing material they wanted to use.
okay.
So it's basically just an amendment to a previous design review approval.
Yeah, nothing, it's in the back of the, 2 windows in the back.
Yep.
Changed to,
2 windows in the back, and he had 2 different roof materials.
right,
And there's no drawings included because the drawings haven't changed.
correct. Any questions on this from the board or comments? It's pretty straightforward. Anybody from the public here to speak to this application? You think so? Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve design review application DR 13-24.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Okay. Item 4 on the agenda is application SUB 13-02, which is a continuation of an application by Shelburne Green for preliminary plan approval for a commercial PUD at 6221 Shelburne Road. This is a pretty long description. I'm not going to bother reading the entire thing. So, A lot of hands are gonna raise up here, I can tell. Anybody who's gonna speak to this application, I need to swear you in. I hereby swear or affirm to tell the truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
Annie?
Yes, this is a two-part application. I don't know if it's misprinted on
Oh,
the agenda.
I'm sorry, yes?
It's a continuation of the preliminary plan application with the addition of a amendment to the existing conditional use approval for the property. We have a couple just administrative notes. This written staff report notes several small changes to the zoning bylaws, which went into effect December 18th. There's some additional changes pending, which also affect this application. And staff will provide board members with an updated edition of the town bylaws once all these changes go into effect. But for now, anything that differs from what was previously approved is noted in the staff report. The preliminary plan is pretty similar to the sketch plan, which was approved on October 16th. At that time, board classified the project as a major subdivision. There's a few comments from the Shelburne Natural Resources and Conservation Committee concerning some of the large areas of impervious surface, lack of amenities and courtyards, and particularly the landscaping along Shelburne Road, which is an area considered the gateway to the village. There were some suggestions about trees and other vegetation proposed for that area, and I don't know, Gail Alpert is here.
I'm confused because I'm a neighbor, so I'm not here representing
Oh,
the
okay.
Natural Resources Committee.
Okay. I will continue then. There was just some suggestions about landscaping, and they had concerns about the landscaping, particularly along the Shelburne Road frontage. There's some concern has been noted that was discussed at the sketch plan hearing from several of the neighbors, particularly from the Gables and from Ockert Lane, regarding, I think, again, the landscaping on the other side of the property, where it buffers against the residential neighborhoods. And there's some noise concerns from some of the Ockert Lane residents regarding noise during construction and trucks, deliveries coming and going.
I'm sorry, ma'am, the microphones
I can
are
speak
not
up.
working on the PA. I would suggest that you move up front. They've got the chairs awfully far back tonight. Usually the microphones work on the overhead, but they are not working.
Okay.
Is that all you had? Ann?
No, I have more.
You have more, okay.
I'll wait for everyone to move. The second part of this application is a conditional use approval, which is an amendment to an existing conditional use approval. It's basically seeking approval for several of the uses which are listed in the warning and the staff report, similar to what already exists on the property, but an umbrella approval for the whole property, which would allow new tenants coming into the development to apply administratively for zoning permits without having to come before the board for conditional use for these specifically pre-approved conditional uses. This would mean that each time the space is fit for a new tenant, the zoning application would contain new square footage and the required parking. The square footage would be capped at 136,499 square feet, which is the proposal for the development, and the parking would be capped per the available spaces. So basically, once they hit the cap, they wouldn't be able to have any more tenants or uses or parking without coming before the board. Some of the permitted uses on the property and the proposed conditional uses require the DRB to determine parking. So staff has recommended that the applicant propose parking formulas for each of these uses based off of similar uses, which are, formulas are provided for parking in the bylaws, which would be part of this approval if the board agrees. And that's pretty much it.
David?
For the record, I'm Dave Marshall from Civil Engineering Associates. I think before we get started administratively, anybody who just came in, if you can sign in on the sign-in sheet, that would be good. There we go, it's right out back. Okay, getting started. What we'll do first is orient you in regards to the site plan for this particular project site. north is straight up, and this is Shelburne Road. We have Sinishore Drive at being the intersection. The existing renovated former Snelling buildings occupy the northern portion of this 20-plus acre site. And currently out between the existing building and Route 7 is Felino's and Fiddlehead Brewery. This proposed project occupies the southern portion of the remaining undeveloped portions of the property. This particular plan identifies the open space components that basically encircle the proposed development area for the project. Currently, there's an existing driveway that services the site and is intended to provide the primary means of access for this new project. This is part of the newly widened portion of Route 7 in front of the Shelburne Vineyard and the Felino's and Fiddlehead structure building. Other components in the immediate vicinity, we have Vermont Teddy Bear and their particular commercial park immediately to the south. On the east, we have the Gables and their particular residential neighborhood, and then we have single-family homes located off of Green Hills Drive, and the area immediately to the north off of Sinishore is the new project that was constructed approximately 6 or 7 years ago. That being the surrounding area, this particular project again seeks to propose a master plan approach in regards to a number of small, relatively small sized commercial buildings as a means of breaking up what otherwise would be the mass of a large structure. The intent is to create incubator space for small businesses, and that being the overall plan, the underlying plan of perhaps how that would play out is shown here on this particular site plan. This zooms in on the southern half of the property and again shows the existing access drive, existing parking, the existing structure, but again, as you move to the south, we would basically have a U-shaped type of access supporting the parking and ultimately a turnaround to allow circulation in and back out, but a series of small buildings that basically would work around the horseshoe shape in support of the goals of the project. As far as setbacks, this is proposed as a plan unit development, which means that it is obligated to provide at a bare minimum 100 feet of green space around the perimeter, and whenever a project abuts a residential use, that gets boosted up to 150 feet. So out of that, there had been previous discussions with the Gables in regards to supplementing this particular portion of the field with new landscaping that has been in place. During the sketch plan hearing, there was some discussion as far as pedestrian access through this particular corner of the property, and since then the fence has been extended to try to seal off this area in regards to at least what is controlled by the applicant. But in regards to this particular preliminary plat application, I must apologize. We basically have added flesh to the bone in regards to the detailing of the utilities, the site grading, and with that have also identified in more detail the presence of a Class 2 wetland that occupies the southwesterly corner of the site. That has been site-walked with the State of Vermont Wetland Division, and an application will be required to be submitted to them in support of the activities that fall within the 50-foot buffer. Otherwise, we have received water and sewer allocation from the town to support the project, and we have met with a number of department heads. The water department unfortunately had some water main breaks that precluded them from being able to prepare their staff report, but nonetheless, there are a couple of small recommendations that they've made that we are very happy to implement into the design plan. So I guess that at this point, without getting into, perhaps maybe we should spend a little bit of time. Perhaps now I'll let Graham Goldsmith come up and talk a little bit about the concepts for the buildings, and out of all that, start to round out a little bit of the ideas for the landscaping, and then we can go back perhaps into staff report and discuss those particular items which have been identified as being worthy of additional discussion to help bring some closure on those issues.
Thank you. Graham Goldsmith Jr., one of the developers of this project. But just wanted to tell you a little bit more about kind of our thoughts here. We've enjoyed a lot of success with the initial phase of the project here. We've had some really great tenants move in, some interesting companies, and a great mix of people in there. And what we were trying to do at one point was to create some space, sort of incubator space for smaller companies to come in. We were talking with a lot of food producers and smaller kind of agricultural value-added products, but also other type products. So in keeping with that, we really felt that the southern portion of the property, as Dave said, it was a great location. We felt there was kind of some big monoliths with the teddy bear factory. They're a great big warehouse. Our building is a larger structure as well. So the idea was to break up that kind of series of buildings into smaller buildings. You can see here, this is a little bit of, not exactly what we're thinking, but it's a Shaker village, so kind of a historic feel for it. We're almost thinking that it's going to look like a series of farm buildings, kind of in a rolling meadow with a hay field going pretty much right up to the buildings. We right now have, I think, 3 different designs, 3 different sizes for the buildings. You know, our thoughts are really, we want to provide what the market needs. So as tenants come along, you know, tell us what they are looking for, we would, you know, design the spaces and try to fit them into one of the 3 designs here, and then build it once, you know, we have a signed lease. But we're thinking about, you know, different materials. We like the metal siding here, but you can go with vertical or horizontal panels. That helps kind of break it up and looks a little bit more interesting than just regular sheet metal. We have some different architectural features that we'll potentially add with overhead doors and things like that. But really the idea with the site plan here as well is we've got all of kind of the services and the parking in the middle of the development. So really the parking, the cars, things like that won't be very visible from the road. You'd really just see the buildings. We're looking at doing gravel driveways and parking as well to reduce the impervious amount of area, impervious surfaces. And really the idea with this too is to try to find a way to build these at a reasonable price so that we can have some lower rents too, to have some newer companies come in as well. It would be open as well to office users as well. And really for the conditional use, what we're looking for is really just what we have here in the building already. It would include enclosed light manufacturing and warehousing, which is consistent with the neighborhood. You have Teddy Bear Factory that does that. This building, we've had essentially that use since the 1960s, but office has been a great addition. So an aggregate of 70,000 feet in total. The buildings range from about 9,000 feet to 2,200.
What's the aggregate square footage you're adding again,
70,000 feet in total. I think we have proposed 151 spaces, parking spaces. And really also we were the ones that did the lane widening on Route 7. So a lot of that infrastructure that we invested in there was keeping in mind that we might want to do something down the road in the southern portion of the property.
Since it's gonna be gravel parking and driveways, what kind of curbing are you gonna use to keep the gravel where it's supposed to stay?
I don't think any curbing at this point.
Okay. Anything to mark the actual parking spaces? So there won't be striping, obviously.
No striping
Just-
at this point.
Okay, so just gravel and just park
Yep,
where it's logical. Okay.
that's what we're thinking for now.
All right.
Could you just give me a rough idea how this has changed? Any of the changes you've made since we last saw this? I mean, have you changed anything with features like?
I think, again,
Brad.
Dave Marshall, the primary change is a tip of the hat in regards to the formal delineation of the wetlands. We found that those were larger than what had originally been anticipated, so we consolidated the structures in the southwest corner of the project site. Otherwise, I think as Andy indicated, it is very similar to the sketch plan application that had been submitted previously.
Okay.
Dave, can I ask you, the Natural Resources Committee raised some concerns about, I think it was, open space, which I'll think of as sort of a congregation space maybe for employees, if you incorporate anything like that. They also mentioned whether or not we've done a good job of landscaping for the visibility of coming up Route 7 and seeing this project. And I think they, and impervious surfaces, is there anything that will prohibit you from paving a lot of this parking area down the road? Because if you were to pave that in the future, it is an awful lot of impervious surface.
Well, let's see, where do we want to start? Perhaps we'll touch base quickly on the open components of the project site. Currently, this is identified as approximately 7 acres that is not being developed with any buildings or any parking of that particular nature. That represents just a little bit less than 1/3 of the total area. And again, in regards to lot coverage, we're currently around 31%, and the zoning district allows up to 50%. So in regards to what the potential would be and where we are today, we're actually less than what would otherwise be, at least, a strict compliance issue, less than what would be permitted. So, and then very quickly in regards to landscaping, as far as at least those vehicles approaching Shelburne, coming from the south, heading north, one thing that's very nice about the project site is that there is a ledge outcrop right in this corner, and it basically provides a mature growth of vegetation. Farmer never got in there to hay that area, and that's grown up to pretty significantly, and it creates a very nice visual screening as you're moving north in regards to what is happening in this particular corner of the site. So in that regard, under the previous project, there were trees planted along Shelburne Greenway. They are small at this point, but they will grow in time. That's at least what we're told. So in regards to at least creating a character and an access focus point, those have been the goals so far in regards to landscaping, but more importantly, again, preserving that particular area as part of that gateway preservation component.
Have you thought about an employee congregation area, like picnic tables somewhere or anything that could satisfy that?
Yeah, we have a couple different areas too, and part of the original project, we have a great outdoor area. I'm not sure if you've been over there, but in the warmer months, we've got a nice water feature with a little waterfall right here. We have lots of tables and chairs. We have picnic tables over in this area. One of the things we like a lot, we're going to try to preserve as much as we can. We've got a great grove of maple trees here, and there's a neat, really great tree in there too that maybe we could add some benches to. We also have a walking path too that goes around the perimeter of the property. So at lunchtime, some people like to walk around the perimeter. Due to some of the wetland constraints, we've narrowed this a little bit, but we did want to have a nice kind of square in the middle there, a little bit of a quad feel in between the buildings that's set back from the road. And as I said before too, we're one of the design elements too is to try to keep a lot of the buildings, I'm sorry, someone's back. The buildings to really kind of block some of the parking and dumpsters and things like that. And just have that nice kind of rolling field. And we're set quite a bit back from the road as well.
So on that note, you mentioned, the trash receptacles. I do notice that you've got a little bit of landscaping around those, but the parking area itself really doesn't really have much in the way of landscaping except for one existing tree. Is there a reason why you may not have incorporated more trees or anything else into the parking area?
Some of it is really the shaker style village. The design philosophy is kind of the simplistic approach. However, we are planning on doing some plantings in there as well. We want to add we've had fun kind of adding edible plants in there, Nanking cherries, blueberry bushes, things like that. So absolutely we'll want to continue that over in this area as well.
But it's not shown on your plan. You said you're adding edible, what did you just?
Yeah, we'd like to continue that theme. We've done that over in phase 1 over here. We've got a lot of those plants, but I'm sure we could add some to the plan too.
So I think, if I may, just so the public also understands, there is a zoning change to correct an issue in regards to historic or pre-existing buildings that happen to fall within the perimeter PUD, the 100-foot setback. So right now, the current rules would basically say if you want to do a planned unit development in this particular district, you'd have to tear down the existing building in order to make it happen. So the Planning Commission has processed that particular request to modify that and make it consistent with other planned unit development capabilities to allow existing buildings to be retained. Nonetheless, for that to work through the process, where it first comes out of the Planning Commission, then goes to the Select Board, and then goes through hearings, and then goes through yet another waiting period, that all, at best point, won't come through until March 5th. So we are in the process now of absorbing staff comments from the board, from the public, and we will be making updates to the plans to reflect a better project. So I think that's kind of what Graham was getting at. Mark was right in the fact that those particular amenities or features as far as the landscaping plan aren't on the plan as of yet, but we're very much interested in making a better project with all the smart people that are in the room here.
Okay. Any other questions from board members?
I wanted to ask you, Dave, about pedestrian access. If any employees happen to live in the neighborhood, directly to the north and east, what would be their pedestrian route to walk here?
Why don't I use this particular image to help identify at least the surrounding properties and the opportunities for pedestrian movement. Right now, what's not shown very well on this is the parking lot that was constructed here. We are looking at creating a pedestrian connection back along the east side of this particular building, and that puts us in the general proximity of the existing driveway that services the water tower. That particular connection's not very clear right now, as far as that's concerned. In fact, there are a number of conveniently located power lines or communication lines that go from the water tower to the building. On the town-owned water towers, everybody's benefiting here, but nonetheless, that represents probably one of the challenges of us trying to really create a nice connection, unless we go around. So we'd have to work with the town on perhaps allowing something to occur on the property, and we'll have to see how far that might go. But in regards, so that represents at least one of the challenges for connectivity out in the northeasterly direction. For the remaining area, there is a walkway that basically faces this particular edge of the existing parking lot. And the opportunities for communicating further to the north basically would be through this particular project site that actually has a paved walkway that finds its way out to Marset with a the intersection of Route 7, at which point then the concrete walkway, the sidewalks, continue on within the village. But that definitely represents, a little bit of what has been committed as far as public infrastructure and what could be improved upon as far as that connectivity. So at this point in time, that's still an open discussion also.
David, one of the things that my perception is here is if you look at kind of the demarcation between existing and the new, is that it's not really connected parking-wise. There's one, it looks like a gravel path that goes from building one over to the existing parking to the north. I mean, is that an intentional feature? Is that?
Talk a little bit about.
Because if we're gonna commingle the parking, we need to talk about connecting the parking.
Sure, yeah, we've added a path in this area.
Okay.
Really, the way we've designed it too is for this project to stand on its own as well. So 151 spaces really could accommodate what we're thinking would be the use of the buildings now. We do have some excess parking given the current uses over in this building. And there, it could be absolutely more of an opportunity to connect the two. However, for this project, our thoughts are really to drive people to use the southern entrance more, make it more convenient for them to just kind of come in this way and depart that way as well, to really utilize that asset. We did, after the last meeting, add this path here, kind of around, which does help, but doesn't quite commingle.
I just don't see people making that journey from one side all the way around there to, if there was a need to utilize some of that parking on the north side of building number 1 and 5, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thought would be possibly to add entrances for these two buildings as well, which is about 17,000 feet too. So that really could absorb or use up the existing parking.
Yeah, if I may, I'll just add one more point to that, is one thing that we heard before at the sketch plan level was that there was concern in regards to how people were utilizing this particular private road, not controlled by this property owner or this property owner, but yet a third property owner, for accessing Green Hills Drive, using that as a cut-through whenever the queuing areas at Route 7 and Marset were challenged. That being the case, again, one thing that we're trying to do here is focus these particular movements to Route 7 and not try to create a easy way for people to even think about utilizing this intersection. The goal is to basically bring everybody out here. That's why the Route 7 widening was done, to provide that center lane for turning movements, was because all of that particular future traffic was going to be coming out at the what we call the south driveway. So that goes back a little bit towards why this is shaped and set up in the way that it is, so that we are creating some discontinuity from the residential neighborhoods to the north and to the east.
Okay. Hang on one second, man. We're going to go around the barn here. Is there any other questions from the board at this point? We can certainly come. Go ahead, Paul.
I was just looking along that same subject line. You mentioned in the sketch plan that you may think of a access gate be closed up on, was it Center Shore Drive during peak times so people don't go through there? Is that still being considered?
Yeah, we're open to different ideas. Unfortunately, I don't control that road. I don't own it. I have an easement to use it. We have put up signs that say, no through traffic. We are telling all of our tenants to really utilize the southern entrance. We're open to suggestions. We're open to trying to help spearhead something like that. However, I don't have the authority to really do something like that.
Just curious, because most people don't really obey the signs that you probably find don't go through, and that would be an easy way, if there's traffic congestion there at all, cut off that way and go through the developments, which I think would not be a good thing to do.
Yeah, and when we were adding a loading dock, you know, everybody, the idea was we aren't allowed to block this lane at all. So I think when it came to talking about shutting it down, some people were upset about that as well. But, you know, unfortunately, just had an easement to use it.
Who does own that road?
I believe it's Peaport.
Right, people? So Dave, I just have a question. Do you foresee any issues with implementing the recommendations from our wastewater superintendent?
Yes, that, I talked to Chris Robinson today, he's the wastewater superintendent, he is happy with the plan as is. Dave made some changes that addressed his concerns. There was actually a memo sent that I received about this that I misplaced. So my comment is not correct in the staff report.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's all right.
I share Bill's concern with stormwater and gravel surface. I think after a couple of years that you're going to be pressured to pave that area. And I wondered if while you're doing all the other site work that you could work some swales into the south side to maybe, as long as you're there anyway.
Well, actually,
maybe to preclude.
You've had your crystal ball out, haven't you? What I don't have here tonight is actually the grading plan, but in your package is the grading plan. And the concepts are to bring the clean water that is basically coming towards these particular building sites and bring them around and reintroduce them into the wetland. But any other runoff coming from buildings or the parking lot is all being collected in grassline swales that basically come down to the stormwater management facility. So that is, and based on just enough slope to make it flow, but not so steep so as to preclude good contact time between the vegetation and the stormwater as it comes off the site. So it actually is going to do a very nice job of pre-treatment before it even gets to the stormwater management facility. So those particular concepts as far as low impact design are in there right now. And that being the background, I think, yeah, that's exactly where we are.
And my only other comment was maybe some additional screening in the form of large trees along Route 7, not necessarily starting out that way, but just to
one
get
thing
that
that Andy
corridor.
brought to our attention, I'm sorry, I'm being rude tonight,
No, it's-
is that for light manufacturing uses, it does have a specific written standard in regards to the amount of landscaping that is required to be placed. And that being the case, we're not sure where the particular light manufacturing might occur within here. It is one of the uses that we're seeking a conditional use approval for. But nonetheless, one of the ways of perhaps taking advantage of the existing screening here is to provide some of that infill here. So I think those ideas are something that can help perhaps meet a standard in regards to ultimately where a light manufacturing use might be within this particular facility. Coupled with the landscaping that's already been put into place along this particular edge, which represents one of the weaker landscape buffering to residential areas, that I think that might be something that could carry the day and take care of a couple of issues all at once.
I would like to point out on top of that, though, that those additional requirements for light manufacturing only pertain to the areas where residential property abuts it, so that wouldn't pertain to the Route 7 corridor.
Fair enough.
Any other questions from board members? I'd like to,
I did have one more.
okay, you'll have another crack at it, we'll do it for you.
The north building. I was hoping to encourage some, the beginning building, the initial building,
Existing building.
existing building.
Okay.
I was hoping that you would put some cedar or something along there to maybe as a noise barrier for, you know, the trade-off of not having to tear it down and move it, but it's still pretty close to that residential area. So maybe whatever you could do to help retard noise from.
On the north side?
On the north side, right.
Okay.
Graham, can you speak at all about the activities and what the noise levels typically are? And then we probably have a couple of residents who will tell us otherwise.
We have a company, Nova Natural, that's in there now. And on a typical day, I think they received 2 deliveries from FedEx and UPS. You know, generally speaking, that's pretty much it that you'll find on this side of the building. You'd find actually that the traffic to the water tower for maintenance of the antennas is actually quite a bit more heavy. However, we did do some screening around the drive there, add some cedars there, and then there is some groupings of trees along this road here as well that is on the residential side. But really, the use is consistent with what it's been for quite some time. Country Home Products was in there doing warehousing for a number of years as well.
So I guess another way to paraphrase that, Dick, is that it's an existing use, it's been there for decades and decades. The applicant hasn't proposed anything more than what historically had occurred there, so anybody who's been in the neighborhood has always experienced that level. So unless I hear something otherwise from Graham, I guess at this point we're saying if there was going to be an increase, then I think we'd be very much obligated to provide mitigation.
This is the last call, but I was gonna turn this over to the public. I was gonna have Natural Resources, assume they have something to say.
We did have some comments. I was recused from the conversation because I'm a neighbor across the street and there's no one here to speak for it. But the comments were noted in Annie's report, and those were pretty thorough.
I thought you said you had somebody coming. I didn't know if they were here or not, so.
Too late.
You're recused. Okay, I'd like to open this up to public comment then.
I have a question.
Could you please identify yourself and could you please enter the microphone? Because you can't hear us. Thank you.
I have a question regarding.
Could you identify yourself, please? Could you identify yourself for the people on television?
Pat Farr from Shelburne,
Thank you.
Chesapeake Drive. I just have a question about additional lighting and security. Does your proposed plan increase the 24-hour lighting that would affect the residents?
What we have proposed for these buildings is wall packs that are the same as over here. They're all downward facing. So really, they're just here to provide lighting for these parking areas. I think we're going to be pretty well shielded too, because we do have this kind of nice horseshoe type theme here to really try to trap most of the light there, and nothing is upward facing. Currently, the plan doesn't have any calls for poles for these for this area. It's all going to be just wall packs that face down. We do have that specified, I think, in the plans too. But it'll be the same as you find on this building with some of the downward facing.
Thank you. Anyone else? If you would please, Graham.
Thank you. I'm Ann Powell, and I live at the Gables. I happen to be on the board there. I happen to be president, but I'm speaking basically because there's been a fair amount of discussion among various residents there about things, and I've been sort of asked to speak up about some of them. So that is what I am doing. There may be other people here from the Gables who have some added points that they want to make, so I don't want to pretend that I'm covering everything at this point. Okay. I also have this written down, which I will give to you. once I'm done. As has been noted, the Gables is basically the eastern border of this area, and both of the present buildings and the ones that will be part of the expansion. There has been comment about the buffer area down toward the southeast corner, where already some trees have been planted, and I believe a wire fence is in there. Is that correct? It's a wire one at this time. And we are concerned, especially listening to all of the comments about all of the buffering around all the other sides of the development, that perhaps more could be done there, similar to what was done in agreement with the Teddy Bear Company a fair number of years ago, where there were actually berms built up and a variety of the appropriate kinds of trees, whatever they may be, that would also add, because this is going to be quite possibly a good-sized impact on at least the units of the Gables that are down at the far dead end of Covington Lane. So we would like to have that considered also. Then we were wondering, because I have read through the report that you folks received from the town staff. I don't pretend to understand every single piece in there, but we did see something that suggested there was a vague possibility, maybe not an expectation. Could there be a restaurant, for example, in any of the new buildings? And if so, or would there be deliveries coming into any of the buildings during the night, other than sort of normal daytime business hours, that would allow headlights to shine back? I can see that that might not be as much of a problem because of the way that they are situated. Indeed, though, if there was a restaurant allowed, that might be open later, more vehicular traffic, possibly more noise, more lights, more aromas, good or bad. And if this did end up being a use in there, what could be done or would be done to block those sorts of pollution, if you will, from the Gables, which are relatively close over in that area. I do want to note that during the October meeting here of the DRB, the application that was submitted by Shelburne Green Business Park included several specifications that we request and hope would not be changed, including that the buildings, the new buildings, would be basically one-story buildings. There will not be loading docks or vehicular access on the eastern side of those buildings. And as you said, Graham, as much of the external lighting as possible will be the wall pack type to minimize any lighting pollution going that direction or the direction of any other residences. I'm going to give that back to you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, just to address a few of those, I guess try to go in somewhat of an order of what you did. In terms of buffering, you know, I know when we did phase one, we really were kind of not quite there. The idea was, hey, if you guys are doing something down the road, we'd love to see the trees be a little bit more mature and have a fence there too to help keep people from trying to walk through and back and forth and disrupt. So, you know, we heard the comments too at the first meeting, and we went ahead and extended the fence too. I don't know if that's helped at all with people walking around, but I do know that it was people kind of coming, not from this property going that way, but the other way. You know, we would absolutely be open to the notion of keeping the loading docks, et cetera, on this side of the property. You know, we don't want to disturb you guys at all, really, if we can help it. There has been the idea of potentially food service. whether it's a restaurant or not, I'm not sure how that lays out. Really, the idea would be at the kind of culmination of this project, you'd have a good number of people working there, and food service would be a nice amenity, be it a cafe, a deli, or something like that. So, you know, if some of the food tenants come in as well, it'd be a great place for some of those products to be sold as well. We could think about obviously trying to place those where it would be at least impact to you guys. You know, I think if we did get anybody in there that wanted to have food service, they'd probably want to be closer to Route 7 to have that exposure anyway. You know, we're absolutely open to trying to do some of these things to mitigate your concerns and be a good neighbor. You know, we really are excited about this project. You know, we're really wanting to have it be a nice amenity for the community and a nice addition. But like we feel like this project really was compared to the teal box it was before. But we're open to suggestions.
To answer your question about the restaurant, restaurants under the current zoning are not an allowable use in new buildings in the Commerce and Industry South District. It would be only allowable as an accessory use, meaning it would have to be at least take up less than 20% of the square footage of the primary use. So a restaurant, if all of the uses in the complex, including the existing, were to combine the restaurant or food service, deli, cafe, whatever, it could be only 20% the size of all of them together, or if it was individually parceled out, it'd be 20% of each individual use. Okay. So it would be very limited, and it wouldn't operate as a restaurant per se, is what you're thinking. It would have to be accessory to the primary use, is what the zoning allows.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Angelica McLennan, and I'm at the Gables also, part of the posse here. And I do live right down in that corner, almost on the line there. I think that we were very pleased with the plantings at the time of the teddy bear, those factory buildings going in there. And that's really been very successful, and I think plantings are a great way to allow all the good things that you are doing on the other side, just so long as when Ann was speaking about the headlights and the noise, and it's a real buffer. But that has worked very successfully also in that it was very carefully thought out what trees were going in there, the ones that would grow at different heights and different rates. Was that it? And therefore, it's really made quite a nice, opaque, and successful, barrier there. Because then we all get what we'd like is that for us not to feel too invaded, but for you to have this really exciting project, which has so much good in it. So that would, and the berm, like the idea of berms too as something to consider. So. Yeah, it could be a win-win here.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll trade contact information.
Yeah, great.
Too,
Yeah, we have yours.
Okay, good.
You gave it last time.
Yeah, okay.
Anyone else?
I'm Nancy Hinsdale, and for better or worse, I'm your closest neighbor across the fence. And I've been very pleased to see what you've done so far. I like your thoughts of making it look slightly colonial, or like a Shaker village. But I hope as much attention as is being given to Route 7 and how everything works from there would also be given to what we're seeing, instead of the mountains and the meadow and so forth. So your plans sound good. I especially like your thinking that extra stormwater from the roofs and so forth would be pushed forward and south because you can see the big wet area that is right across the fence from you already. So the only thing now that concerns me is the zoning changes that were made. This really scares me, the amendment, which would allow several businesses to come together and share their 20% and have a larger cafe, restaurant, or whatever, simply because that would usually mean evening hours, more traffic, and if it were one of those back buildings, unless, you know, there's a real solid buffer, it would be hard for us to live with. You maybe could point out, Graham, where my unit is on the.
Sure, in the gables? Or?
Yes.
Yep.
Right there.
Is it? Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you, you know, we absolutely aren't gonna kind of skimp on materials on the back side of the building or anything like that. We're gonna try to make it as nice as possible. As far as the zoning goes, I think that's a separate kind of item that's going through the town.
Those changes have taken effect.
Okay.
It basically, the difference is the 20%.
Yeah, because you've said some really important things that I think some
I'm
of us
sorry.
are really missing.
Yeah, we
I'm sorry,
a lot
but
of them.
The zoning changes that have taken effect, the change was basically allowing an accessory use, 20% of the primary use, with now within a PUD, which is what this is, plan unit development, that all of the tenants in there can get together and share that 20%. So it would potentially allow for a larger area of square footage to be some sort of retail or food service or some other use that's typically not allowed in the Commerce and Industry South District, but would be allowed in this accessory capacity.
so does that mean I'm sorry, Mike, but
It's-
does that mean a restaurant?
It would have to, it could, yes,
Okay.
it could.
Well, that's what,
It would have to demonstrate that it was accessory in use to the existing uses. So as I think Graham pointed out, if there were some food producers in there, it would be a place for them to maybe, as a retail and a cafe, to sell some of their products. It couldn't be just a restaurant that had nothing to do with the rest of the development. Like, a restaurant owner couldn't go in and open up a restaurant.
It's gotta be.
Yeah.
It can't be Dunkin' Donuts.
No, it's
No.
gotta be
Or
a
could be
use
a-
that's an accessory to another
A
use.
chocolate company
Right.
that sells cocoa and.
Yes.
and maybe you could.
But
suddenly have
potentially,
Coke-
something
Coke.
just to, potentially it could be some sort of a cafe that would serve all of the employees for the complex. That could be considered accessory. Likely, probably a fine dining, sit-down, large restaurant would not be able to be viewed as accessory to the existing uses. So it probably wouldn't be something like that. Does that answer your question?
It's better. Probably wouldn't be as different than would not be to.
Yes.
What was that?
Well, probably wouldn't be as different than that would, it would not be allowed to have, I'm Jody Crosby, I'm from the Gables also. I just wonder with what the rule is, like with, someone would rent, but they might leave and someone else would come, and we won't be having a meeting about that. So I think it would be interesting to know, our a nighttime dining restaurant, I think the Gables, I'm speaking for me, I'm more concerned about a nighttime restaurant.
Than anything else.
than anything else. I'm not against a cafe or any kind of day thing. It's more of a nighttime activity over there, and I'm just wondering.
The threshold for this, again, is it has to be accessory to
Right.
one or all of the existing uses. So, I can't say definitively until I see the proposal,
Right,
but
right.
I don't think that there is a possible way that something like that, like a evening operating sit-down restaurant, could be accessory to the type of uses they're proposing. And the use being mostly manufacturing, so that.
So, again, Dave Marshall, if you could imagine maybe things that we had talked about with the renovation of the existing building was if you were a chocolatier and your business is obviously to sell, you might be selling mostly wholesale, but you might have a little factory store that was associated with your space. And what Annie's saying is that can't be more than 20% of your space. So it's going to be accessory. It's going to be something that supports and helps out the main use on the property. So the point is that you can't have a restaurant that just would stand by itself come in and locate within this particular zoning district. It's just not intended. When we talked about a cafe, or more specifically, if you could imagine a big factory, there used to be one here, where you would have your company cafeteria. You know, that's an accessory use to support the company. So, but they weren't serving to people outdoors. I mean, they didn't have the public coming in, that type of thing. So really what we could envision probably in the most extreme case would be the cafe type of thing that basically creates a nice retail section for perhaps various manufacturers within these particular buildings. And, oh, by the way, perhaps you can get some coffee there too. That helps all the other employees on the property. So anyways, that's kind of what I would envision. Now, it's Graham's project, but in regards to what I'm hearing and perhaps how an application of this particular type of retail, food-ish type of use would occur, that's kind of what I'm seeing and what we've talked about in the past.
Hi, Gail Albert, and I guess I'm speaking as Shelburne Vineyard at the moment. And I'm wondering about pedestrian access. Given the types of buildings that you're going to have there, and the types of uses that you're going to have in there, and the affinity that that has to Fiddlehead and to Bellino's and ultimately to us across the street, is there going to be some kind of more formal than there currently is pedestrian connectivity among all those things? Because I think it could make a really nice kind of destination tourism for Shelburne if there were that kind of connection and people didn't have to get into their cars again to go down to Polino's or Fiddlehead, for instance, but could perhaps use one parking lot and get to the other place.
I'll speak to our frustration with the Vermont Agency of Transportation. They have a very strict policy that basically precludes things that slow down traffic. So a pedestrian crossing, in order for you to get an approval for a pedestrian crossing, you need to have a certain amount of pedestrian traffic. The irony is that to get the pedestrian traffic there, you need a crossing or have a place where you can corral everybody into a safe crossing point. And that is one that's been discussed before, but whether it be here or in Ferrisburg or in Charlotte, we've been talking till we're blue in the face, trying to get those particular types of amenities for the communities, and they've fallen on deaf ears so far. You see that on TV? So anyways, perhaps we can get some policy changes that will help facilitate a little bit more circulation for pedestrians as far as their ability to enjoy the community also.
Yeah, it's always been my dream to have a nice, attractive bridge across Route 7 for pedestrians. But I guess I was thinking right now, because I've come up to your place a couple of times for the yoga classes or anything else, and I try to sneak behind that little hill that's between you and Fiddlehead. And I wonder about any kind of pedestrian connection there that would also maybe allow cross-fertilization and parking.
Well, that's something that we've been talking about quite a bit, and I know it's something that a lot of people are interested in. We currently still have one space available in the building that's about 10,000 square feet. So our thought is we really need to find out who goes in there, what our parking demand is before we can kind of open up our lots for other neighbors. Because clearly, we have a lot more parking than this building. But,
But
you
in
know,
terms of a pathway for pedestrians?
At some point, yeah, we're interested in doing that. You know, I know it's a kind of an insurance issue too, and maintenance and things like that. So we have talked with John about it somewhat. And I think once we settle out what our needs are and how our lots handle the demand of our building, we'll be much more open to talking about that.
Thank you.
Could you pass the microphone to the back, please, Gail? Thank you.
My name is Peter Wiegand. I'm a resident of the Gables. I just have a question on this zoning change in the 20%. Will that be a function of this meeting and committee, or is it in a separate hearing? And what will be where will the definition of what this change is going to be outlined? Is it going to be affecting this project, or?
Sure, that ordinance, that change has already been made.
Let me, Mark,
Go ahead,
Mr.
Dave.
Chairman, if I may jump in
Please do.
and be rude again.
No problem. You made it happen. You know more about it
Two
than I
different things
do.
going on here. I'll talk first about the proposed zoning change. So, right now, to allow, you already know about it. So, for the public, right now, a planned unit development, that's basically where you take concepts and consolidate them and provide, in this particular case, the zoning regulations require that you create green space around the perimeter of the property to achieve certain goals as far as buffering surrounding uses from a concentrated use in the middle. The regulations right now would say that if we wanted to create a planned unit development, that you're not allowed to have any buildings within 100 feet of the property line. So, unfortunately, these are existing buildings that have been here since the 60s. And it seemed quite frustrating that in order to create a nice consolidated development in the southern portion of the property, that we couldn't use that tool because of this particular requirement. Now, the town in the past, for residential projects that had existing buildings within the perimeter, pre-existing buildings, they changed the rules and said, it doesn't make sense to tear down an existing building. It's always been there. Everybody understands what the uses are. And as such, what this particular zoning change proposes to do is basically allow existing buildings to stay when you create a planned unit development for the entire property. So that basically allows this to now be looked at in a more consolidated way using some of the planning tools that are allowed within the planned unit development component of the regulations. So that's the zoning change. Now, the other component, which was adopted in the past recently, talks about how some other accessory uses can occur within certain zoning districts in town. And that is the one that's in place. The definition of accessory is in the zoning regulations. Obviously, when you talk about accessory, I think that's why we have the board to help arbitrate just what is accessory and what isn't in regards to compliance with any proposal that comes before for those particular types of uses. So hopefully I haven't confused the issues too much, but bottom line is that there's one zoning change that's proposed right now, that's going through the process to allow existing buildings to stay where they are. And then there's a recently approved change that allows for a little bit more flexibility on how retail and restaurant?
Not
Food service. Just food service,
Food
sorry.
service.
Food service.
It doesn't specify any, those are examples and they're uses that are accessory.
But I'll leave that up to Annie, she's the expert on that particular end of things, and I won't try to confuse the matter any further.
So then my understanding is that the existing rule, which was put in place, would allow for 20% food service, which is what we were talking
It
about.
allows for a 20% accessory use. It doesn't explicitly allow for food service. It has to be a use that's determined to be accessory or subordinate in nature to an existing use.
And when such a use is put in place, is that subject to another review, or is it just, how
No, it would be administrative. They would have to apply for a zoning permit for each use as it was added.
And that would be 20% of the total space, which is,
If they were to choose to do so, yes. They would either have the option of doing 20% of the total space, or if one or several of the individual tenants wanted to do their 20% on their own, then that would cut out the rest of the available space.
thank you.
Could you pass the microphone up, please? Thank you.
I'm getting more worried by the minute. It's conceivable that many food service things that would then cluster here, in which case we no longer have a commerce and industry zone, which is what we all knew we had beside us and understood, not completely, but mostly, when we were in about the sketch plan. So we could have a Dunkin' Donuts, chocolate.
Standalone
Not Dunkin' Donuts.
Why?
Not Dunkin' Donuts.
franchise, no
Because it has to
standalones.
be accessory to something that's already in there.
I see, okay.
A hypothetical situation would be, say somebody opened up a commercial bakery like Klinger's, for example. Klinger's Bakery, I mean, they started that off as a commercial bakery and started, more retail, and now it's grown into a pretty good, healthy retail. But it's still only a portion of their total operation, so if somebody were to, say, sell bread or donuts or something, it would have to be they would have to be doing that as their businesses. This is just kind of a sideline, if you will, or another component of their business. A small 20% component of their floor space could be selling retail, their products retail. To do a big restaurant in there, it would seem you would have to take, the stars would have to line up, and you'd have to have a number of different people all together, and you'd probably have to take 3 or 4 of these buildings and combine them all together to get a restaurant that is large enough to support, opening a restaurant. It costs a lot of money to open a restaurant. You're gonna need 30, 40, 50 seats to make it work. And I think a lot of things would have to line up just right for that to happen.
All of this is not really my side of the brain, but I'm trying to kind of get with the program. So what you're saying is that, say, that example, it's good to give examples, potential examples, like the Klingers. So you maybe have that little place that has a few tables, the way they do up at the Klingers, which is so small uptown, where you just sit down, they will serve you your coffee, your tea, you can have a little lunch there, a sandwich within. So that's like the 20% that would go into being a retail food something. But you can't, what you're saying is that you can't add up the 20% and actually have an individual.
That is what they're saying.
You could add it up, but not have an independently standing restaurant out of that add up.
You could
Potentially, but the restaurant would have to be accessory to all of the uses. So if there was if there was some sort of food producer, the restaurant would have to serve their food. Or that is highly unlikely.
Right,
It's
and it's
more
so
of the Klingers
highly
example.
unlikely that configuration.
The more
would
likely
happen.
example is, I think, what Dave or Graham said, is a communal cafeteria or a cafe to serve
Right.
the employees or something like that.
Okay. So the more clarification I think we have, and especially for Nancy, of really what that means, the more we will have a little peace, and you will feel better about that too if we really have the clarity on that. But that's coming. That's coming. Thank you.
Can I just ask, just for clarification, Graham, Whitecaps?
Yeah,
You have a cafe there.
There's a
yes.
cafe at Whitecap, and the person who started it also started Bell's Cafe in Williston, and it's called Simply Divine. They're open from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. They serve sandwiches. They do a little bit of catering for offices in the area. You know, something like that I could see as being a good fit just to keep people on site and serve them coffee and lunch. However, you know, a nighttime restaurant really doesn't make as much sense for an office park here and light manufacturing. You know, really more so the thought too is if a baker came along and wanted to serve sandwiches on the bread they bake, I think that would be a nice option. The accessory use item was in there before. They did just add some language for specifying the amount and kind of aggregating it. One example is we have a toy company in the building, and they do warehousing as their primary use, and they have a small amount of retail where they sell toys up front. So really the law allows for something like that. You know, if it's something like if we could provide you with, say, a time constraint, you know, if the cafe goes in, they won't operate past, you know, 9 p.m. or something like that, or even earlier, you know, we'd be open to talking about something like that too.
Any of that information that we have, I mean, you know, ignorance is not bliss, so anything you can give us makes us feel better.
Yeah, and it's a new law too that, you know, I wasn't the one that pushed it through or anything, so I'm just kind of learning about it as well now.
I think another way to look at it would be that if you asked the operator of that toy store or Clinger's Bakery, for example, and said, would you have this restaurant here stand alone from your bakery operation? And they'd say, no, we'd never be able to operate this business successfully here.
It does help
So
with the
that kind of,
examples. Yeah.
that's an accessory to something else. And I think, just, this is an opinion, but in a facility like this, when you have an on-site cafe, if you could get 45 people to stay on site and eat lunch instead of jumping in their car and running whatever, certainly the businesses downtown aren't gonna wanna hear that, but that would be, you know, if you get 25 people at noon, or 30 or 40 cars, it would have an impact if this place is filled up. So that's something to consider as well.
Somebody would take this, I'm a singer, and it's too tempting.
I can give you another example of a cafe at Technology Park where Ben & Jerry's is. Sugar Snap operates a small cafe on site for the employees. Anybody can go there, and I stop in there occasionally if I'm in that area. But they're only open until 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
And it's just for the, it's really just the employees that primarily go there. It sounds like it could be the same type of thing.
Thank you.
It's kind of too like the cookie dough place that sells creamies on Route 7, you know, that kind of thing. You as the owners would be the ones who would be okaying or not okaying whoever came in there, correct? So when you, does that go through any kind of organizational zoning type of thing, or is that just you personally as the owner?
As long as it's
As you choose.
conforming, I mean, we have to propose it, we have to get like a building permit too.
There's a zoning.
No, but I mean, once everything's built and Yoga Roots leaves and I fall apart, because I go there a lot, and something else comes up for you for that building, do you just make that decision yourself as the owner, or does whatever goes in there go through some other process? I mean, once this is all built and we're all going, we know how companies leave. Yeah, tenants leave and they come back, and, you know, all of that process just happens. So I'm just wondering, is there any kind of ruling around something that you just said you could put something like, you know, you need to stop at such and such an hour, but would that really happen? Do you, I mean.
Sure, yeah, I mean, you can make rules and regulations for the building. You know,
Okay.
I know there's
All right.
noise ordinances in the town
That just
too
interested
as
me.
well.
I wasn't sure how.
One of the things is, if there's a change of use, they've gotta come back. So if they have a a warehouse space, and they're gonna change it to an office or, you know, manufacturing or some other allowed use, they still have to come back
Come
and
back
get
to
it.
you.
They have to get
Oh,
it.
well, great.
No, I don't
Don't-
think so.
They don't have to get a change of use?
They have to get a change of use, but it's administrative. It comes through the zoning office.
Right, but they still have to go through the process.
Yes.
though.
Okay.
The only way they wouldn't, if Yoga Roots left and yoga, something else came in, they wouldn't have to do anything. If it was the same,
Right, if there was another,
Yeah.
that same.
or if it was a dance studio, it would be similar. But if they, Yoga Roots left, and sorry, I know you don't want that. Neither do I. And, you know, I don't know, clothing manufacturer, they would just come in and say, X amount of square feet is now gonna be a clothing manufacturer, and they would apply for a change of use, and that would come through the town.
Okay.
But there is a checks and balances, and that's what the zoning administrator's responsibility to do, is make sure that the uses are consistent with the approval. And likewise, things that the board can also do, either through offers of the applicant or through their own findings in order to mitigate impacts on the surrounding property owners, is to create certain conditions of operation. So if one of the conditions of operation was to limit the hours of certain retail activities, then maybe that's one way to help mitigate concerns in regards to impacts on abutting property. Not to put words in anybody's mouth, but those are the tools that are available to the board to basically address concerns of this nature.
Okay, any other comments from the public? Board members, I'd just like to make a few comments. I think public transportation connection here is important, and I think I saw in the staff report you reached out to CCTA a while back. I think I'd like to see an effort made to try to reignite that. I know they've got a lot of money to put bus shelters around. As far as like some type of pedestrian way up through there, I think at the very least, I'd like to see something defined on the driveway as a pedestrian route. So if somebody's gonna walk down there and catch the bus, that it's kind of segregated from the drive lanes, kind of like what we did on the Rice Lumber application, not a sidewalk per se. I think that's important, just for safety reasons. Not talking about a separate sidewalk, I don't think they work in a case like this. If you drive around and look at all the sidewalks with 6 inches of ice on it that nobody walks on these days, I think that's a good example. And I'd also, I think we need to see a photometric plan.
Actually, there is one in the application package,
Okay,
and basically, these are
I didn't see one in here. I didn't.
Yeah, it's sheet 2.3, it's very light, but nonetheless,
Pretty well,
there is a
okay.
photometric takeoff there. And again, the concept is to basically provide building-mounted lights, basically downcast building-mounted lights, to basically provide localized lighting, and not create a big, you know, white light area. The intent is, again, very localized in its nature. So you have to look carefully because the
On these 5 sheets,
printing.
I didn't really know what that was. So those are,
I know I can't see without my glasses, so.
I got a no shot. So, okay.
So what we'll do is we'll reissue those with a better weight on the numbers so you can see those better, or perhaps a scale that makes them a little bit more user-friendly.
I also have full-size copies if you want to look at them, or if you want to request them for a particular project.
Yeah. Did you put the cut sheets for the light fixtures in here?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all I have. Anybody else?
I have one, does the board perhaps want to look at the waiver list and determine whether they would be willing to grant the waivers at the next? Oh, sorry, the applicants provided a list of waivers that they would like.
Thanks.
A list of waivers that they would like deferred until the final plan. So if the board wanted to talk about whether they would be willing to grant those or not. And I would also add the parking, the paving parking would be part of that for the final plan as well.
I mean, just to let everybody know, we can't approve this thing tonight because of the pending zoning change that this thing is all predicated on. So certain that we're gonna continue this tonight, but, yeah, let's talk about waivers.
Not even a determination, they're mostly just deferring there's 5 requested that,
Yeah,
for the final plan.
I didn't have any issue with them at all. We still get another crack. We're gonna have several shots at this. Maybe we'll get some of this information the next time around, or you think it's all gonna be deferred till final, or
Well,
is that your intention?
let's talk about that. I mean, right now, we have, March 5th is when all the stars are supposed to align.
Okay.
Before that would be a wonderful time to at least introduce anything new to you, as far as changes and updates to the plan. That being said, we would like to have a preliminary plat approval that's as good as possible, or at least provides the board confidence and the applicant confidence that the final plat is not going to be anything earth-shattering as far as changes. So I think there's some benefit of reintroducing updated plans to you sometime between now and the hearing before March 5th to carry the day. There's not a lot of them in there, but perhaps, what is the second hearing date in February?
The 19th, I believe.
Okay. And that'll give us some time to basically review the comments from tonight and introduce new things into the plans.
Wait.
And out of all that, have something that will bring a little bit more closure to the open items.
Are you requesting to come back for a preliminary plan again on February
No.
19th?
So I just
No,
got
not
overruled.
until the zoning has been approved, I think, because then we get the final approval as well after that.
We do, but it wouldn't be any reduction in time. I mean, it wouldn't take any more time. It would mean that we come back, use some of the board's time to basically
You
flush
could
out anything that we have.
You could also submit updated materials and then just have them reviewed on the 5th. Is that,
That's
it's
true.
up to you,
Yep.
but.
You wanna do it that way? Yes, the answer is yes. So March 5th would be the date in which we seek the board to continue the hearing to, at which point we will do our homework in regards to the open issues, support staff with new information in regards to anything that is changed. And that being the case, we'll allow the board to review a more complete application with the understanding that the underlying zoning is also in place also.
The agenda's okay, March 5th? That's pretty far out. We got plenty of openings out there. You haven't even looked at for
We
anything,
do.
so you never know. Okay, you never know. Well, we've got quite a few other items on the agenda here tonight. So I would like to see if the board would like to entertain a motion to continue this hearing. And I would also encourage people that are here to keep your eye out for the next hearing if all the stars line up and the zoning gets changed, and keep in touch with Annie and
I
see the new plan.
would like to add to that, you won't be receiving any notification for the March 5th hearing because it's being continued. So it's March 5th. And that's again for the continuation of the preliminary plan. And there will be another hearing that you will be notified for if you're in a budding property later.
So with that, I'll make a motion to continue application SGB 13-02 and CU 10-07R1 to March 5th.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, David, Graham,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Good input. Okay. The one thing I'd say is if you guys could keep it quiet and clear out, because you can't hear on the TV when everybody's chatting. We can keep moving here, there's a lot of anxious people here, I'm sure. Okay, David, are you still up on this one, for Waldorf?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is application SUB 13-03, which is a continuation. This is kind of bookkeeping. This application is going to be withdrawn, and it's going to be coming in under a different application process, if you will, so. Yes, this is Waldorf. So to get this done, we need to make a motion to accept this withdrawal or anything, or
Nope,
we're good to go?
John.
Okay. So, that moves us up to application CU 14-01 and SP 14-01, which is an application by Lake Champlain Waldorf School for a site plan and conditional use approval for modifications to an existing school complex. The proposal includes an addition to the principal structure, access and circulation improvements, and the relocation of an existing storage shed, several minor site plan adjustments. This property is at 359 Turtle Lane, is located within the residential district. I need to swear anybody in who's going to speak to this application. I hereby, oh, David, you're already sworn in. You're good to go. Nobody else is going to address this application? Really? Well, okay. We can, you're always sworn in, Gail. We know. So, Annie?
Yes, all right. This application is very similar to the sketch plan application that the board has seen several times. It's just coming in now as a site plan. The applicant is seeking conditional use and site plan approval for modifications to the existing school that was originally permitted under different zoning regulations. The day-to-day operations of the school up to this point have not seemed to have any adverse impact on any of the items listed in the conditional use review criteria, and the proposal meets all of the relevant dimensional requirements for the residential district and section 1980.3, which refers to the amount of primary structures allowed on a lot. That is, if the kindergarten building is reviewed as an accessory structure, as per the discussion from the December 18th meeting. And that is pretty much.
Okay, David?
Yeah, that's it. There's some notes in the staff report about a few concerns, but
I saw those.
yes.
You come to those.
Very good. For the record, I'm Dave Marshall from Civil Engineering Associates. What we have before you is actually the same plan we showed you as part of the previous application sketch plans phase. This is an ortho photo that basically shows the existing conditions. This particular 20-plus acre property extends a little bit further out to the right-hand side of this drawing. North is actually straight up. So put everybody in the northerly direction. To orient you in regards to this particular property, we have Harbor Road that runs in the east-west direction down by the floor. And between there and this particular point, we have the municipal wastewater treatment facility and public works garage and the various infrastructure that supports that operation between Harbor Road and this location. So historically, since this particular facility was originally constructed in 1989, access has been through Turtle Lane and eventually comes into the site, in which there's existing parking, there's a turnaround, there's actually, CCTA does have a bus that provides drop-off within this particular aisle, and it comes back out again. The school has progressed over time. There was originally a master plan that showed a very aggressive use of the property, originally almost 17 acres of modification for athletic fields and buildings and roadways and parking. It's been a modest build-up over time since the original 1989 school buildings in this particular location, administrative, kindergarten, and ultimately what we're talking about today is the multi-use room at the far north end of the project site. Right now the school has the opportunity to actually expand the existing multi-use room to a size that's perhaps more appropriate for a school with these number of students. And this particular plan shows again the existing conditions and faintly, it is a slightly dated plan, the proposed means of access out to the back area where the proposed building addition will occur. This particular plan has been modified. Currently the site plan application before the board has eliminated the turnaround on the east side of the building and is consolidated back in this location as a means of consolidating or reducing the amount of perimeter impact to the remaining tree area. things that have been done as far as emergency access is that the application seeks approval to widen the two access roads. Currently, the one on, now let me get you back oriented in the same direction. So north is straight up. If you look carefully, this hatched area represents the building in its arc nature. This particular access currently serves, according to the fire department, the emergency access way. It is very curious only because this particular road provides even more access. Well, under the current NFPA requirements in which the building needs to comply with any future additions, both of these access have to be a minimum of 18 feet wide. So this particular application actually seeks to improve the width and the accessibility on both sides of the building in support of the proposed addition. Then also, because of a change in the regulations, these particular types of public spaces now have to be sprinkled. So this particular project basically will take the existing 8-inch water main that services the south end of the building and will extend it along the west side access road and bring that to the sprinkler service for the new multi-use room. That being the case, things that we heard about last time was the challenge as far as organized parking area. Again, one of the challenges of a gravel parking lot is, unlike a nice paved lot that has parking spaces all painted out, is that you don't have that typically on a gravel surface. So things that we've actually proposed in this particular case is a little bit of outside of the box thinking, but something that we think is one way to proceed. What we're actually proposing to do is one thing, well, maybe take a step back, one thing we benefit from here in this particular part of Vermont is different sources of crushed stone material of different colors. Right now, Shelburne is known for the Shelburne limestone, and hence the very white color that is the predominant or the only material that's on site today. However, immediately to our south, down in Ferrisburg and in New Haven, there is a black shale type material that actually creates a very nice contrast between the two. What we're looking to do is actually to shave off a portion of the existing white stone and place the black material in places where designated parking is. More specifically, what we were hearing was we wanted to basically make sure that there were adequate width means for emergency access vehicles to gain access to the building. That at this point in time, this particular program would basically tell all staff, parents, that if you're coming to park here, park on the dark material. One thing that's not shown on here is a sign that would support that particular approach, but one thing about at least the private school is that, well, I guess any school, that if you can get the teachers to read the newsletters that go home, that this is how we educate them in regards to how this particular site is utilized. So that was one of the things that we're looking to do to deal with some of the concerns in regards to site circulation, but also more importantly, emergency access to facilitate ready access on both sides of the building in support of the proposed expansion at the far north end. I think we're open to questions.
How are you gonna keep the two different color tones separated?
You will definitely get contamination over time. So it's going to be a maintenance obligation to go back and freshen that up. Yes, absolutely.
Any other questions from the board at this point?
It's noted in the staff report, and I had a conversation with Rick Lewis, who's the head of the water department. He had a concern about the water line, the size of it. Have you spoken with him?
Well, at this point, Rick was more concerned about making sure that the water main, as it's extended out on the west side of the building, actually has flushing capabilities. So one thing we're adding to the plan here is either going to be a hydrant or a blow-off at the very end to basically enable this line to be properly maintained and flushed on an annual basis. So that was the primary recommendation from Rick's office as far as that's concerned. But we have no issue with compliance with that.
Are there hydrants out there?
Trying to think on town portion of the Turtle Lane. I believe there are hydrants through there. But I'm hard pressed to answer whether there's anything on the parcel here.
Probably wouldn't hurt to have.
It's a fair point.
What's this, is the fire chief looking, seeing this? Latest revision?
I have not seen any comments yet.
Okay. Has he seen this application? Yeah, fire chief?
Yep. No, he is not commenting.
All right, I stand corrected.
What does it say so in here?
There is a hydrant right at this location right here, so that is at least proximate to the kindergarten in this particular area as they enter into the site and set up for any type of emergency.
Any comments from the public? I know Natural Resources had some concern about Act 250 permit. Or
We
something.
just asked whether they would be going through Act 250 or not.
Yes.
You will be.
Gail, I'm sorry, I'm being rude tonight. Just,
Yeah.
the answer is yes. The entire parcel is subject to an existing Act 250 permit, in which there have been a number of amendments over time. In addition to the Act 250 requirements, the Act 250 permit, there's also obligations to work with the Nature Conservancy. Because it was actually the Nature Conservancy that actually sold this property to the Waldorf School to allow this to occur. So every time there's a proposed modification, the TNC signs off on that particular activity. So those are all parts of the checks and balances in regards to that. And that's again, one of the things that we find beneficial of trying to do an addition, not only because the infrastructure says you have a multi-use room, it makes sense to expand it in its location only because of the program space within the school, but also there's a current turnaround right here, and we'd be doing most of that building addition right on top of that. So it seemed to make sense to do it there as opposed to create another kind of bulb out, I'll call it, for lack of a better word, as far as expansion into the remaining area here. Because this is a clay plain floor forest, and it's one thing that the state has asked that we try to minimize as much as possible.
Has TNC been notified already as a neighbor?
I understand they have. I haven't spoken to them directly, but the president of the Waldorf School has been in contact with them, yes.
Thank you for maintaining the pervious lot.
There we go.
Is the addition a two-story?
Hang on a second.
You are...
I need to swear, if you're gonna ask questions or speak to this, I gotta swear you in on this application. I hereby swear affirm to tell the truth, nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury.
I do.
Thank you very much. Please identify yourself for our
Pat
huge
Farr.
television audience.
Pat Farr from Shelburne. Is the addition a second-story addition on top of an existing building?
It's actually a one-story addition.
One-story addition, thank you.
Yeah.
So Gail, can I ask you, in your Natural Resources Committee notes, you talk about whether or not it was necessary to extend the service road to the north.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
The Natural Resources Committee talked about whether or not it was necessary to extend the service road to the north. Has the applicant addressed that sufficiently for you, or what exactly were you referring to?
Well, I was referring to that road, and we wondered whether it was necessary to go completely around the building with that service road, yes. Thank you for reminding me.
Maybe I'll answer the question. So Gail, I trust that the commission looked at the current site plan. This obviously is one that's dated.
Yeah.
One thing that we brought this particular turnaround back within the main component of the site. One thing that we have shown very faintly is that there's an existing storage structure right here. And when we do the building addition, we're basically looking to take that structure and put it on here. So really, this is just a very short extension of the road that will, in essence, be something all the way to the end. But as far as the NFPA requirements, the National Fire Protection Association, they do look for that particular level of access. In regards to what the architect told us that we needed to be doing to be compliant, the answer was yes, we did need to go there.
I think it's pretty important to have a school building.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you aren't required actually to have more fire hydrants.
Oh,
For a school.
actually, believe it or not, it's amazing how often or few fire hydrants you need. It's every day.
Yeah, what the fire departments will tell you is that sprinklers are worth so much more, only because of response time and the ability to basically knock down anything that might be starting up very early on.
And when you were talking about the water line flushing,
Yes.
at the end there, I'm not sure I understand what that means, but does that just flush out onto the ground? And how did you explain that that was taken care of when that happens?
Well, typically, if we do what's called a blow-off, it's basically a device that allows for water of adequate velocity to run through the pipe, pick up any sediment that might have settled out over time, and to be discharged out onto the ground. So what we try to do is we create a blow-off that actually discharges right onto a stabilized pad to eliminate erosion. Otherwise, if you could imagine a fire hydrant just sending water out to the side into a clay plain forest area, it would disturb the duff and the like of that particular forest flora. So the intent is to create a blow-off with a detail that basically creates a self-contained, controlled situation in regards to how the water gets, the energy of the water gets dissipated. But ultimately, during any type of flushing event, there's going to be certain water that will hit the ground and then spread out from there. So that is going to be something that occurs once a year, but typically we don't find that to be an issue.
And so is there vegetation on that pad
Actually,
that would help to absorb that water and the surface
well,
area?
typically what we find we have to do is usually use a stone that has a diameter about 8 inches and smaller. So it's basically a stone pad that is used to dissipate the energy, because anything that is smaller than that typically gets dislodged and moves around, and we've lost the effect of that. So often, because you're only using it once a year, you'll see that vegetation will creep back in occasionally into the crevices of that particular rock pad.
Well, I was thinking deliberate vegetation that would help to absorb some of that water rather than have it flow off into the forest.
I think we'd be very challenged based on the amount of volume of water, as far as absorption.
Thank you.
Any other public comments? Annie, you pointed out few things in the staff report.
I think the main one was the water department comments,
Yeah.
which have been addressed.
And you referred us to the application letter on a few. Did everybody on the board pick up on that, on the references to the application letter?
Anything specific that you're referring to, Mark?
Oh, the landscaping
Yeah, the
was talked about.
landscaping.
Essentially, it's an existing site. It has landscaping, so I think that the applicant is requesting that they not be, the board waive the landscaping requirement and not require additional landscaping.
The alternate would be to
Parking.
allow the applicant to take credit for all the trees that are being retained.
Yes.
I'm okay with that, although I will say that I was hoping that something more could be done with the parking, but I fully understand this is not a very large project that you're proposing at this time.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions from the board? Well, would anybody like to consider making a motion on this application?
I'll make a motion to direct staff to prepare a decision indicating approval of conditional use in site plan applications CU 14-01 and SP 14-01.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No other added conditions? We're good the way it's written? Okay,
Very good.
I think we're
Thank you
good.
for your time.
Thank you. Okay. Item 7, application SUB 13-04. Application by David Billadou for sketch plan approval for a 3-lot residential subdivision, which actually creates 2 new lots. The property is at 236 Webster Road and is located within the residential district. I'm gonna need to swear you in. I hereby swear affirm to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, and the pains and penalties of perjury. Thank you. Annie?
Yeah, hearing was continued from the last meeting, and there's some concern about Lot 3 specifically on the property, or what is proposed as Lot 3, having enough developable land, that is land that does not include slopes over 15% or wetlands. Other than that, the proposal does appear to meet all the residential zoning district dimensional requirements. Several residents of the Chesapeake Drive community were at the sketch plan meeting and voiced some concerns, specifically about the preservation of wetlands and the developable land area. And the board did request that the applicant return with a site plan that includes the wetland boundary, slopes greater than 15%, and a proposed building envelope on Lot 3. The applicant has provided a revised plan. And there was an issue with the site plan. The full building envelope is not shown, so I have a new copy. There should be 5, I think. It's exactly the same as the plan in the packet. It just shows the building envelope more completely. Sorry, that plan is exactly the same as the one that was in the packet. It just shows the complete building envelope. The one in the packet did not show that.
Okay. Mr. Billadou, would you like to?
I'll speak to Mr. Billadou. I'm Gunnar McCain, consultant, working with Billadou's.
Sure, how you doing, Gunnar?
Very well, thank you. So this is the same plan that you're looking at, as described by Annie. There's a buildable area on Lot 3 up in here. We have not done the site-specific topography mapping yet, but we did use a top of bank as located by the land surveyor who surveyed the property. And I've walked the property, and that certainly is a very reasonable representation of where the top of that steep slope is. We've shown the wetland boundary and we've shown the floodplain boundary, both as depicted on the State Agency of Natural Resources interest locator maps. So again, we will go out and definitively define these for the final hearing. We have not had our wetlands biologist out to locate the edge of the wetland, but the elevational rise between the river and the flat ground up near the top is in the range of, say, 30 to 40 feet. So there's a very good steep slope here. The wetland and the floodplain virtually can't come very far up because of the slope that's there. The hydrology wouldn't be there for the wetland, and the floodplain just doesn't, if it came up 30 feet, we'd be in a lot of trouble everywhere. So we've depicted a building envelope on Lot 3, we've depicted a building envelope on Lot 2. This property line may move a little bit from what shows on this map, but the acreages will stay adequate and the setbacks will stay adequate. And for the final hearing, we will bring in the site-specific topography to definitively document the 15% slope limit. And this lot has access off Chesapeake Drive, this one off Webster Road. They both are served by municipal, or will be served by municipal water and sewer. We think this is a pretty straightforward project. So I'll leave it at that, and if there are any questions from the board or the public, be happy to entertain them.
Okay. questions from the board? I'll start with one. You're still talking about a curb cut somewhere on Chesapeake Drive?
Yes.
Do you have a rough idea where in relation to that curve you'd want to put it, Gunner?
I think it would be off the curb back in about here somewhere. Again, once we do the site-specific mapping, we'll detail that and show that specifically where that would be.
Okay. And utilities, you plan to take those off Chesapeake Drive?
Off Chesapeake and off Webster both.
Both?
Again, both of these, this is very flat off the road onto the site, and this is sloping over here, but it's also flat from the road in. So it's very easy to develop these spots.
Any other questions from the board?
I've got a question for Annie. Annie, as this is a residential district, what, if we were to find, say, that we didn't have enough buildable area here that we were comfortable with, zoning-wise, what mechanism would come into play?
I mean, the buildable area, I think, as we discussed at the sketch plan, doesn't come into play except in the rural district for the straight subdivision. Basically, if they can show, the applicant can show an area where a building envelope could be located on Lot 3 or any of the lots, there really is no mechanism to control that.
For this particular project here, Lot 3, there's I mean, the envelope is not as big as, some other houses. Do we have any, minimum size for a building envelope or anything to that extent?
No, but basically the envelope would go with the approval, and then anything that would be built would have to be built within it. So it would be effectively restricting the size of the development.
Okay.
I would suggest you could put a decent-sized house on this, for sure.
Are you still planning just to build a couple thousand square foot, single-family home? 18?
No more than 2,000.
At least you were gonna start on Lot 3?
The clearing, which is Lot 1, I believe, if you know what the clearing is, he'd already got that purchased, and they were gonna start building in the spring.
Okay. Well, Lot 1 is the existing house, so.
I'm sorry, I got mixed up.
Lot 2.
There you go.
Gotcha, okay.
Annie, lot number 2 has sort of a regular shape. Is there anything in our ordinance that talks about desired shape for lots?
For lot shapes?
Yeah. I mean, usually sometimes you'll see things like spaghetti lots not encouraged or something like that have these, long areas reaching out.
I'm not aware of any requirements. I can check on that, but I'm pretty sure the requirements to get away from spaghetti lots refer to their frontage.
Okay.
If I may, the surveyor plan, I didn't have the surveyor plan when I prepared this. His plan shows Lot 2 doesn't have this point coming out, sort of comes out across here and then angles straight back into here. So the final configuration will be less unusual than what you're seeing here.
And Lot 2 will be able to meet the minimum size?
Absolutely.
Okay.
On Lot 3, the 1.2 acres, looks like that includes a piece of the Platte River?
Yes, the property line goes to the center line of the river.
Is the setback from the center of the river or the edge of the river?
The 100-foot setback for the ordinance is from the center of the river, was my
When I built my house, it was 100 feet from the bank.
Perhaps I misread that, but the 100-foot
But
line
that
is
was 30
here.
years ago, so
I'd have to check the ordinance.
I would have to check as well. I thought it was in the property line, but you can't build within the wetland area anyway, so
I
it's
think
kind of
they
a non-issue.
try to change those to center lines because the bank is a moving target.
Right.
it is.
Yeah.
Mine started at 117 feet, and now it's about 90.
I think Mark's correct. I think that is, the current is the center line.
It's a very similar situation to this lot.
I believe the controlling factor here will be the slope issue. We show the wetland down here very close to the river, the floodplain somewhat off the river. The 100-foot setback comes up in here, and the building envelope is another 30 to 60 feet beyond that. So the top of the bank is what will control, not the setbacks to the river or the wetland.
Have you done a site walk?
We have not. Comments from the public. If you
Hi,
would
I'm
take the,
Vin-
grab the
I'm-
mic, please, sir, and identify yourself.
I'm Vince Barr, and I live on Chesapeake Drive. How do you, on Lot 3, how do you plan on taking care of the sewage? How are you gonna access the existing sewage system?
I haven't designed that yet. My understanding is it's out on Chesapeake Drive, and we would access it from there. If that's problematic, going back to Webster is certainly an option.
Well, I can tell you right now, coming into Chesapeake, it'd have to be pumped,
Which is fine.
depending upon that line that's existing on Chesapeake is large enough to handle the flow. So I would think that would require an engineered plan.
The way this process works, sir, is this is sketch plan approval. We don't really get into that level of
Okay.
detail at this point. It would have to go through a review by the, Chris Robinson in the wastewater department, and they would certainly have to develop an engineered plan for that and do all the calculations.
Very good, thank you.
Yep.
Jeff Strawbridge, Shelburne, Chesapeake Drive. I'm an abutting neighbor. So how big of a house do you think could fit in that building envelope?
Well, as David pointed out, what they're envisioning building is in the 2,000 square foot range. And that would certainly fit on that building envelope.
Yeah, what do you think is the largest size you could fit within those requirements?
About 75 by 40.
Okay. Just trying to get a sense of scope.
Ballpark,
Yeah, we're trying to understand what it would look like.
Sure.
Is,
That's
you
a
know,
lot, that's a lot bigger than the
Right.
2,000 square
That's
foot
right,
we're
that's
talking
right.
about.
Okay, good, thank you.
Hi, I'm Spencer Picard, also from Chesapeake Drive. I just want to reiterate the concerns we had from the previous DRB meeting. And those being, I do believe it is 100 feet from the river as far as the ordinance is concerned, but then I also believe it's 50 feet from the wetlands line. And I know that you had said, Gunnar, that you're going to have the wetlands agency in to do an updated line. I know there was a 96 line and a 2004 line that were created, and I'd like to see, I believe it's farther up the slope, the 2004 line. And with a new development, I think it needs to be within 5 years, that wetland line. So that will be included in the next plan?
It will.
Okay, great. And then from there, that 50-foot line, I'd like to see just kind of where that comes into play from being 30 feet off of the front line of Chesapeake, of the property, and then 30 feet off of the abutting line from the small boat launch from the town, how that will fit in with the envelope and staying within that slope. And so that's like one concern. I know Rob Beleza, sorry, had a concern about like the traffic when construction is being built. There's 14, I believe, kids on that street that we just have concerns about, and would want to make sure that any construction that was done took that into consideration. Also, from the stormwater considerations, I know that last year we had 2 houses that were basements were flooded. And it actually turned out to be a stormwater situation where the stormwater was drained and then everyone's basement kind of came unflooded, I'll call it. So just making sure that additional housing that's put onto that stormwater system is adequate for additional housing. And then also the impervious surfaces that are put on that plot, if it is even buildable, how that will affect runoff into the La Platte River, and concerns as far as the environmental impact on the La Platte, and then the potential for state endangered species of the stone catfish that lives in the La Platte River on such a building.
I'm Diana Clayton, also an abutting neighbor on Chesapeake Drive. And Annie, when you gave the summary of last time, we were missing the aspect that our neighborhood had brought up about the children on the street. And The potential curb cut, the location of that is hugely important because of the fact that we moved into this neighborhood, all of us. Each driveway has no other driveway across from it except for the two that are at the very end where it's a dead end. And we have a shared common space. And so the proposal for this land, if it is found to be viable to put a house on, appears as though the only place where the curb cut will be either directly at the bottom of my driveway or the Balasa property just next door, where they have 3 young children. And we don't have currently any traffic pattern that has 2 driveways. It's a very small street, and it's curving in nature to slow the traffic down. So I just wanted to bring up, again, the safety aspect. And being one of the homes that did have water in May, it was directly, as Diane Rooney spoke at the last meeting, due to the fact that the town water table was full. Our storm drains for the whole system on our street was full. And she, I know we're gonna see the engineering report as we get into that detail, but that is a concern. We continue to experience standing water and have concerns over capacity on our street.
To address at least some of those comments, certainly the comments about the wetlands and delineation are certainly accurate. The A&R has a requirement that if it's more than 5 years old, one needs a new delineation. My firm has a wetlands biologist on staff. We'll have her delineate that. She'll check with the state wetlands biologist to make sure we're all on the same page. And the plan will show the 50-foot buffer associated with that wetland, and everything will be outside of that because it's a requirement. As far as the construction traffic goes, we understand, and this is no different than anyone who is building anything in any home. If someone's putting on an addition, if someone has their garbage truck coming, I mean, there is activity on these streets. There is no reason to suggest that these lots will be any less irresponsible than anyone else who already lives here in terms of what they will and won't allow. Everyone respects children, and that's a standard issue everywhere. We can't have trucks speeding up and down roads. It's just not appropriate or acceptable. As far as the curb cut goes, we will bring that in with the final plan. It is a very limited development here. We're talking one more house in an area on a road that has, I didn't count the number, I'm going to say 8 or 10. I don't know the right number, but one more out here in addition to those. And again, we would anticipate the occupants of this to be just like you folks. There's no reason to think that they're not going to want the same tranquil neighborhood that you've all grown used to. As far as the stormwater issue goes, these sites shed towards the river, not towards Chesapeake Drive. So there's absolutely no reason to think that whatever happens here will have any adverse effect whatsoever on the stormwater situation on Chesapeake Drive. And that stormwater is far enough removed from the river that there is every reason to suspect that there will be no issue as far as environmental degradation of the river due to just 2 additional houses fairly well spread out in this area that are set back from the river. What will be, in this case, probably about 150 feet, and in this case, something even more than that, closer to 200. So with all of those things together, we understand your concerns, we respect them, but we really believe that this will not create the problems that you're envisioning.
It is centerline.
Yeah, thank you.
Connor, could you hand her the microphone?
Oh, sure.
I have concerns about the tree removal that's already been done. Excuse me, when we first got into Chesapeake Drive, you could not see or hardly hear traffic at all. Now, since the property has been cleared, I can count the cars going north and south, accessing the Webster Road, access road off of 7. My concern is that if you're going to build, the trees have already been, there's a lot of trees gone. You will have to clear more trees. And the more you clear, the less, the more soil erosion potential that you have, degradation of the property going down into the wetlands abutting the river. There is no way that you can build a new house without cutting more trees. and that's my concern.
I'll let David speak to that. Thank you.
Hi, my name's David. I own Webster Road. If you gentlemen were to do a site walk or whatever you want to call the memorial and count how many stumps that are out of that ground, you may find 3 of them about this big. You'll find probably 6 dead trees that should come down, but what you see was all the brush that I took out of there. Not the trees, just the brush, because I was afraid of a fire. That's all I gotta say.
How long have you lived in Chesapeake?
99.
How old is that development, is Chesapeake? When was that built?
When I moved in.
We built,
Pat is
We-
the first house.
we moved before Mr. Bilodeau did. We were the third house
It was in what
in
year?
1998.
Hi, Gail Albert, Natural Resources Committee, and I just want to thank the members of Chesapeake for the research that they've done in terms of natural resources, and just stipulate that what they've said about wetlands and are concerned for runoff to the river is accurate and reflects the views of the Natural Resources Committee. And I would underline that I would like to see a no-cut zone beyond any building envelope that is allowed on lot 3, I guess it's a larger lot there.
Yes.
So that there could not be additional cutting beyond the back of building envelope, and that the yard would encompass both the home and the building envelope for the protection of the river and potential runoff.
When I cleaned the woods out, I called the EPA and I asked them about cleaning my trees and stuff like that. And I'm gonna quote their words to me. You can clean all the trees out of there you want, but don't drop them in the river, okay? Do I need a permit? No, you don't need a permit. It's less than 50 acres, okay?
I'm just suggesting that there might be a restriction put on the building lot itself once it's completed.
So, the reality of that situation is that we'll have an edge of wetland somewhere adjacent to the river. We'll define that exactly, we don't know where it is yet. 50 feet up from that will be the buffer. The buffer, by definition, is a naturally vegetated buffer. You can't cut the trees in the buffer. As far as the building envelope it goes, we would be remiss to say no cutting directly along the edge of the building envelope because there's a certain clear zone around the house that you need for safety and construction and whatnot. So to suggest that we wouldn't cut any trees beyond the edge of that envelope would be a real challenge because we might end up with a tree that's 60 feet tall that ends up being 12 feet from the house, which probably is not an appropriate situation from a danger perspective. That would be considered a hazard tree, I think, and people wouldn't want that. So yes, a few more trees will need to get cut to build a home for sure, but there will be significant vegetation left along the river as mandated by various environmental protection requirements that exist today. In addition, we will certainly show erosion controls between the buildings and the river on the downslope side. Those are fairly industry standard construction practices these days. Any reputable contractor is going to use them. But we'll be happy to depict them on the plan as a mandate, just so that we have some definitive erosion controls that are mandated to be done to address some of these issues.
I have one more comment, actually, and it's a concern.
So I did hear earlier that Lot 2 had been sold already, is that correct?
It hasn't been sold, no.
It hasn't been sold. There is an interested individual, a builder, who has an interested party that might want a house there, but at this point, that is just interest, not done. There's no done deal, nothing's been sold.
Okay, I thought I'd heard sold.
I did, I used the wrong word, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I figured everybody know nothing can get sold, but this has been final.
And then the other concern, or just note, is that there is the easement of the utility lines that does run from Fairpoint to the side of Chesapeake, just a note of how the driveway would go underneath the utility lines there.
Okay.
There's an overhead utility line, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they're big ones.
Oh, you're
And they're
right.
pretty low, they're under my driveway too, so.
They go all the way down to the other end of town.
Presumably those utility lines meet the
Right,
standard
otherwise-
specification for height, and we can put a driveway under them.
Yeah, if the truck wipes them out, it's the power company's responsibility.
Right, they need to be a certain height, that's a regulation that the utility companies are subject to.
And they're gonna be getting moved anyways. They're going under the bridge.
I know they're supposed to be taking out down
Yeah,
towards
they
the
got
trailer
it
park in
permitted
Harrington
already,
Village.
right.
I think they're working on it, so
I don't know when.
I think those are gonna go away, ultimately. Any other comments or questions from the audience?
Will the utilities that go into potentially Lot 3, will they be underground utilities?
That hasn't been decided yet.
Is that, there's underground power on Chesapeake, I take it?
That's right.
Yes, there
Is
is.
there- Okay, then that will be underground, if the power's underground now. I haven't researched that issue yet, but others are aware of that, obviously, so that's the way that will be.
And I've already talked to Scott Fraser with the power company, and hooking up, he says it's gonna cost $200. Because of all the transformers or whatever are already over a certain time period, so everything's prorated.
Any further questions from the board members?
You done a test board on that lot 3?
Have not.
You're probably going to. The only reason I'm suggesting is they did some test borings in some areas similar to that, and they found that it's shallow, there's blue clay, and that soil has a tendency to turn over in large quantities. There's a half acre over behind the post office.
We'll look into the
Just
soil type
letting you know.
issues just to see what the maps are in terms of what the soil types are and see what
Yeah,
makes sense to do out there.
There's some unstable soil on the other side of the river, I know that from personal experience, so. Anything else from the audience or the board?
I just have a procedural question.
Okay.
If we were to conduct a site visit, would we do that before our next meeting, or would we schedule a special day for that?
Well, it's kind of a consensus of the board. We'd all have to agree that a site visit was required for one. Make that motion and we can start from there.
Well, I think the applicant has addressed a lot of the issues. However, I do think there's been sufficient testimony from the public that we should at least do a site visit. I am concerned about, access to Lot 3 and where a driveway should be placed, and we might want to put a condition like that on our final decision.
I'm not opposed to it. I'd just soon do it sooner than later if we do, because it's no fun in the snow. I've done that before.
It's nice and clear now.
Yeah. So do you want to make a motion then, Bill, to conduct a site visit?
Yeah, as far as part of the motion, I would like to schedule a date for it, so how do people feel about
Well, that's the
conducting
way
a
the
site
draft
visit?
motion reads. We do it for site specific, so.
Friday?
This Friday? That works
Works for me.
Works okay for me. Is the applicant okay with a site visit, say Friday afternoon?
Yes, sir.
What is a time that's convenient for the board members?
I'm pretty open.
I am also.
Same here.
I can't do it Friday, I don't know if it's critical that I attend.
I see.
I think
Shut my phone off.
we would have to have a quorum of the board for it to be an official meeting. So,
I'm not so sure about that.
If you do a site walk with less than a quorum, you can't talk about it back when you come back.
Didn't we run into that where we just had to come back and somebody had to,
Or maybe we had to testify.
we had to testify what.
Had to
occur-
testify?
Or there was testimony of the board.
And the site walk's open to the public as well.
We ran into that, was like 5 years ago, I can't remember.
Yeah, I know, it's been a long time.
Well,
so Mark, I think
1, 2, 3,
most of us are okay
You
with
make it?
Friday.
I can make it.
Yeah.
You pick a time that's convenient for you.
give me 2 seconds here, okay?
Sure.
Caught me off guard. Any time is good for me. So I'm gonna suggest, time when the traffic is not, how about 10 o'clock in the morning? Would that work for you guys?
It's good for me.
Okay, Bill, 10 a.m.?
Bringing breakfast.
10 Friday?
Yes, 10 a.m. Friday?
Yep.
That would be the day after tomorrow, so there is a motion on the table to conduct a site visit at 10 a.m. on December.
January.
You've got December here.
Yes, I know.
You're fooling me, sorry about that. Today's the 17th, 10 a.m. Somebody like to second that?
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And I think that being said, we would automatically move that into a continuation unless somebody sees otherwise.
Continuation of the sketch plan?
Yeah, what do you think?
You're going to come back with an additional map where you change the lot lines for lot 2, correct?
Right, that's fairly easy, and there is some significant work to do relative to the site-specific topo mapping, the wetland delineation, et cetera, that, I guess we'd like a pretty good weather report that the board's satisfied with the project before we invest the resources to do that work.
So just, I think you've got a pretty good action item list that you're gonna come back with, Gunnar. You're gonna take care of all the wetlands delineation, curb cut. For me, I guess, yeah, he has identified all the issues that I would like to see in a final, so. I would entertain a motion to approve it, the sketch plan, and take it to final.
Can I actually speak to that?
Sure.
One thing that was mentioned last DRB that I also thought was recommendations was to have a staked out, for the site visit, to have a staked out footprint of where the proposed house would go, and a staked out driveway from the curb access. So if we do that, I just would love to bring that back to the table as a recommendation from the last DRB.
So would you have an issue with staking out the building envelope on lot number 3? Or the line for the building envelope?
No problem doing it, the question is if I can get there tomorrow, really, and I think I can probably get my guys out there tomorrow. So we will do our best to get there tomorrow to stake out the lot 3. That's the primary point of interest, is the lot 3 building envelope? Correct.
Yeah, that'd be good if you could get it, even plus or minus a couple feet.
Yeah, that's what we'll have to do.
Yeah.
Because keep in mind as well that this edge of that building envelope is defined, it will be defined by the steep slope. I won't have that steep slope defined until I do the site-specific topography mapping. So.
Right, but that's part of the site visit, I think we should be able to see the top of that.
Yes,
slope.
you can, by looking around the site, you can easily see where that gets too steep.
For me, it's not, I mean, stake, it'd be great if you can stake it, get it close, but it's so small, you'll be able to see the
Right.
envelope pretty easily, so.
Yep.
So can I ask you a question? Would you prefer to come back to sketch again after we've done a site visit, or do you want to go ahead to a final at this point in time? What's best for you?
If you're going, well, as I think that through, we probably would come back to a sketch. If you're gonna have recommendations from a site visit that are gonna impact the final, I don't really wanna do all that work. I'll do most of it, certainly, but I wouldn't wanna do all of it up front for final. We'd be coming back to final twice because we'd be hearing your site plan recommendations for the first time at that meeting. So if that's the likely scenario, I guess we would go.
We
with
really
sketch
do
this
have to
time.
give you that feedback in a public hearing.
Right, understood.
Yeah,
Understood.
so,
So how do people feel about just continuing
Yeah,
sketch to the next hearing?
how's our agenda looking?
Unlike this one, it's very open.
So is there any objection to Paul doing his own walk if he chooses to?
I have no objection, David, do you? No?
Oh, you can't make it, Paul?
No, I can.
Oh, Paul.
Oh, I was looking at the name card, I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks.
Oh, yeah. Not a problem.
Okay. Good, so then going back, entertain a motion to continue this to the next meeting, which is,
February 5th.
I will make that motion.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Item 8, application CU 13-20 has been withdrawn. That sends us to item 9, application SUB 14.
Oh, actually,
What's that?
sorry, it hasn't, the applicant
withdrawn?
indicated, they indicated they would withdraw. I have not received a final confirmation, so I would,
Are they here?
just on the erring on the side of caution, I would ask the board continue it,
Move to continue.
or deny without prejudice.
Do you think they may come back?
No.
Okay, then, I think deny without prejudice is appropriate, otherwise we gotta keep putting this on the agenda,
So
right?
moved.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Who seconded that denial without prejudice? I didn't say, I'm sorry.
I thought I heard Paul say it, but it's been a long day. All those in favor?
Aye.
So that's denied without prejudice. Item 9, application SUB 1401. Application by Shelburne Farms, pre-and-fill Lentil Act to amend final plan approval for an existing mixed-use plan unit development. The proposal is to change in the alignment of an existing road which serves 3 developable leasehold lots and 1 agricultural lot, properties in the rural district. Need to swear anybody in who's gonna speak to this application. I hereby swear affirm to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury. Thank you very much. Annie?
Yep, this is a very straightforward application. This road is in question as part of the original Shelburne Farms Plan Unit Development Rural Mixed Use, and applicants requesting just to reconfigure the alignment of the road, moving it in such a way to allow there be a larger or a more buildable area on lot RL4. A small portion of the drive area that is proposed to be reconfigured also crosses the farm property. And all properties are part of the PUD, which requires the amendment approval. And the staff report lists some concerns from the Shelburne Natural Resources Committee regarding the widening of the road. That's a misunderstanding, I think. As the application does not propose to widen the road, it's gonna stay the same to meet the existing specifications. I don't know. That was passed along to me, so.
I think that came because Dean had suggested that since the road was built, there were changes in the zoning that said that the roads had to be wider or something like that.
That is true. But as proposed, the proposal is to realign the road and then to, the portions that will be changed will meet the existing road alignment. So it's, I don't know.
So it won't have to comply with the new zoning?
That's up to the board, but yes, I would say it's just a modification of an existing road, so it could, under those terms, not meet that.
What is the road width, 14?
Yeah.
Is the fire chief, was he happy?
Yes, I'm getting to that.
Some
I'm
committee
getting.
can't
Yes, the fire chief has looked at it and has no problem with it. And other than that, the proposal doesn't appear to raise any major issues under the town bylaws or site plan review criteria. And applicants and the board may wish to discuss the addition of some language into the decision that would allow the realignment of the road in the future without a further amendment to the PUD.
Okay.
And that is all.
Mr. Galpo?
Yes, I can add a little bit of additional information for everybody. Essentially, this is the original subdivision plat as part of the original historic PUD that was submitted on behalf of Shelburne Farms and approved by the town, and also Act 250. On this particular PUD, survey plat, it did show an existing kind of agricultural road.
Thank you, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Can we revisit that, or do you guys hear that okay? So
No,
the
you're good.
plan here is the original survey plat that was approved as part of the historic PUD. On that survey plat, our office showed an existing road that went across RL4, RL5, the RL agricultural lot, which is a non-developable lot, and RL6. During that time, Shelburne Farms actually hired a land use planner outfit firm by the name of Matlock and Associates, and they had created a plan, which I think you guys have copies of. If not, I brought more. That basically laid out the proposed lots, along with view corridors, roadways to access those parcels, and that was.
Sorry, I didn't.
You don't have that?
To the board,
Okay.
just to.
So I've got 4 copies. And I actually have a large scale here. So when Shelburne Farms actually marketed these parcels as long-term lease lots, this document was actually part of that legal agreement, showing the roadway access to serve these properties. Recently, Shelburne Farms, back up a little bit, RL5 was developed as a single-family residence. That's currently a single-family residence, and the access to that lot utilizes the existing agricultural road. The road goes through the main developable portion of RL4, as currently was shown in the original survey plot, which is different than the Matlock plan. As part of this proposal, we're basically, in 1986, I don't think that the PUD requirements were probably as stringent as they are currently, and it probably allowed for some flexibility in the roadway. Under the new rules, the zoning bylaws, once the PUD is approved, the road must be constructed in accordance with the roadway location, and because the Matlock plan was not actually part of that application, we're basically re-requesting the approval of that route. And it's mainly, in talking with Annie, it mainly deals with the access across the Shelburne Farms parcel, which is actually only this main little entrance to it. But we've shown that going across all the parcels, consistent with the Matlock plan. The only deviation we've made is, if you look at the ortho photo here, there's actually a pine plantation that was planted in the ag area. The Matlock plan predates that and went right through the center of it. So we would like to shift the roadway slightly to avoid any disturbance to that plantation. It actually screens the road from the lake, it screens the road from the lots, and it's actually much more, and grade-wise, it actually works a lot better. So this solid hatch line represents the Matlock layout with that slight deviation, and that's the change in the roadway location we're requesting. The road will be 14 feet wide. We've met with the fire chief out there, Jerry O'Bat. He's looked at the alignment. This new alignment's actually better than if we went into the lot and had to turn and get some little straighter access. He's fine with the 14 feet. And in terms of utilities and all that, nothing will change. So that's generally the overview. I don't know if you guys have questions. In regards to cutting, I know there was a comment from the Shelburne Natural Resources. We have actually surveyed the entire route. We've picked up all the specimen trees, and the road has been, to the best of our ability, placed based upon the Matlock plan and to minimize the disturbance. Obviously, we're going through a wood lot. Trees will have to be cut. However, we've minimized that. We've minimized the grading as much as possible. And certainly we'll work with the contractor. Shelburne Farms is very sensitive to that. They don't want any more trees cut than what absolutely has to be done. And then the existing roadway, the gravel will be removed, and that'll be fully vegetation established. So we'll let that kind of go back to natural conditions. And there is state permitting, stormwater, and Act 250 on this, which we will have to obtain also.
Questions from the board?
What's the retained use area?
The RL Ag, or this, there's actually two There's an RL Ag, which is actually owned by Phil and Cleveland Ag. And that is an area that is owned by RL4, RL5, and RL6. And it's to be used as agricultural use. Currently, it's being leased back to Shelburne Farms, and they're using it for an agricultural use. But there's a bunch of, I don't have the covenants, but there's a bunch of restrictions and covenants that limit it to, agricultural and farming use. And then there's also an easement on the, behind the lots, that's on Shelburne Farms parcel that limits what Shelburne Farms can do to reduce the impacts of these parcels. And there's no changes to any of those as part of this application. The only thing that Annie Dunn had indicated is if conditions aren't imposed, it would be great if it allowed a little bit of flexibility on the tie-in on the south side where it ties into the existing road. Just because that's the exact location will be somewhat depending upon where a potential building went on RL6. And we just would like to have the flexibility if they choose to shift it 5 or 10 feet from what we're showing in this plan, that it may not trigger another DRB review, but if that's warranted, that's fine. And then all of the internal development, RL4, RL5, and RL6, the actual access to the particular houses will be covered by a building permit if and when those are developed.
Any comments or questions from the public? Give me the microphone, please. Chris.
It sounds like, it all sounds very responsible. I guess the only other comment from the Natural Resources Committee, which Annie noted, was whether there might be replacement of any trees in the area where the road is removed, rather than just letting general vegetation regrow.
Yeah. We've actually looked into that. That roadway is actually so narrow. It's consistent with what we're going to be proposing to construct. It's heavily vegetated right now. There's very, very large trees out there. Very little light getting to the forest floor, so it's actually not even a lot of regeneration. So our plan is to not replant anything. I think we're going to let nature take its course. Trees will grow in that location. And I think once, we remove the gravel, re-topsoil it, and then you let the leaf litter fall on it, I don't even think you'll tell the alignment. I mean, I don't know if you've been out there or not, but it's a very tight road, and it's heavily vegetated.
Yeah, we were just concerned about possible invasives and that sort of thing, so.
I think in the Shelburne Farms and the owners of these lots will work with it. If invasives do begin to occur, they'll be removed, but I don't foresee that as an issue.
Any other questions from the board members? Anybody like to consider making a motion?
I'll make a motion to direct staff to prepare a decision to indicate approval of application SUB 14-01.
Before you second it, do you want to take into consideration Annie's comment about allowing flexibility in the
We just asked for an updated map if it's done.
yeah, Annie talked about if they needed to make some minor realignments in the road after they get in there and start building it, so they don't have to come back to another hearing. And I think the other comment was about naming the road. The fire department mentioned that.
Yeah, I actually forgot that that was a 911 issue, and the applicant has actually asked if they could be conditioned as to not be required unless all 3 lots are developed. The 911 standard now is to name a drive or road that accesses 3 lots.
Okay.
And for now, as it is, I believe there's a house existing on
Just one, there's
one of
just
the
one
lots
home
that
back there.
it has an existing address that references the road that comes onto that. So that would basically allow them to not name the road unless the 3rd lot was developed.
Would that require a development review board hearing if we had to name it?
Our request would be that it would not. That goes to Peter Frankenberg and.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell you, Sugar Bush would be good. What do you say, Al?
Sugar Bush Road, or
Yeah.
just
Yep, Dad would like it to
write that down
remain
and.
the same.
Yeah, typically what happens is when you guys, if a road name is required, you guys will put a request to the Peter Frankenberg, and then they'll go through the 911 addresses and the police and fire departments to make sure it's a compatible name with other roads, and then it'll be approved and.
No other Sugar Bush roads.
You just don't wanna make sure there's any duplicates. If it's a private road, we don't get involved, nor does the select board.
Yeah. This way, if lot 4 isn't developed, you guys don't have to change your address until those lots are developed, which I think is a benefit.
Thanks.
Okay,
Well, just for clarification, the address of that house is Sugar Bush Road.
Yes, 379.
Yeah, I don't think this road could ever be called Sugar Bush because Sugar Bush actually extends around right to the market garden.
Okay,
So it would
okay.
have to be something other than Sugar Bush.
Can't be
unless
Sugar Bush
that road's
extension.
renamed.
Well, thank you for the clarification. All right. Have to think about that.
it'd be worth trying to minimize the confusion if they ever have to get there, so. Okay, so anyways, Bill, would you, do you wanna take that into consideration, Annie's, recommendation on, minor changes?
Yeah, I'll consider that a friendly amendment to the motion to just incorporate a provision that minor changes to the road layout can be made if necessary.
Did you want to define minor? You don't have to. I mean, you can leave it open-ended.
I'll let you do that.
Okay.
All right. Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for your patience. I realize it was a long wait. Isn't it so exciting? Yes, sir.
Seat or two here that are available.
Yeah, we've got an opening.
Oh, Craig, is that your purse?
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
So that takes us to item number 10, CU 14-02, an application by Civil Engineering Associates on behalf of Andrea Kaufman Trust for a conditional use for a modification of an existing lake shore erosion control structure at 86 Mariners Cove, and it is located within the residential districts, the lakeshore and floodplain, and watercourse overlay districts. You here for that one too, Chris? You're sworn in, you're good to go. For anybody else who's gonna speak to this one, you're sworn in, Gail. All right, Annie?
This is another seawall, and the application is for the approval to construct a seawall to replace the existing riprap, which according to the applicant has deteriorated over time. This proposal also includes the addition of a stairway on the northern end of the property, in connection with the proposed seawall. The proposal appears to meet the relevant lakeshore overlay dimensional and use requirements as noted in the staff report. Staff recommends that the board give specific consideration to the following when making a decision. As with any seawall, will the project have an undue adverse impact on the character of the Lakeshore Overlay District? Do the unique characteristics of the site make seawall the best solution to prevent loss of principal structure or significant erosion? And thirdly, are the biotechnical erosion control methods not a feasible solution for this site? And I also have a letter to distribute that I believe was, you all saw a copy of via email from Bob Furrer, who's a resident of Mariners Way, regarding parking during construction. I don't believe this was shared with you, this came after the staff report. Just for everyone else, Bob is talking about parking on Mariners Way during, I guess, prior construction on other properties, and has requested that, should the board approve this project, that there be a condition added that vehicles and equipment do not park on Mariners Way. This project is on Mariners Cove. And pass that out. Did you wanna give that to me? Yes. And there are some comments, I believe, from the Natural Resources Committee, and I will they're noted in the staff report, but since Gail's here, I'll let her elaborate.
No, let's let Chris talk about the proposal first, Gil.
So, I think Andy did a good overview of kind of what's going on. But we're basically looking at 86 Mariners Way. There's an existing stone retainage on site. It's not necessarily a stone retaining wall. It actually looks like it was larger riprap that was basically placed on the native material, or maybe it was excavated out and then placed on top of it along the length of the shoreline. That stabilization's actually been compromised due to the wind action and the waves and everything. It's actually undermined a lot of the stones. There's a lot of voids. It's pulled a lot of the sediments out, and it's actually pulled the stones out into Shelburne Bay also. So as part of this proposal, we're proposing a large stone retaining wall, which is consistent with several properties, both along the east side of Shelburne Bay, adjacent to this parcel, slightly to the north, the majority of those, also on the west side of Shelburne Bay, and also what we've done for the town of Shelburne, basically involves larger riprap. The work's done above the 98-foot contour. We basically excavate out a keyway. The larger stones are stacked, and they're stacked up to an elevation that's above what we foresee as the high water, and also above what we saw during the high water from several years ago in the wave action. We've done a bunch of these designs around the town of Shelburne and also in adjacent municipalities. They've held up very well, and they've really reduced the amount of erosion. As part of this permit, our office has also talked to the Army Corps. Some of the rocks were actually pulled out into the water, and we are submitting a permit from the Army Corps. It's very simple, it's very straightforward, but it will allow us, we cannot place any material, we cannot disturb below 98, but we can remove the rocks that have been pulled out from this location. And that's a self-verification permit. It's very straightforward. It's a one-page document, and so we will issue that, and we have already contacted the Army Corps with that. Our hope is to obviously use all of the rocks that are out there. The larger ones we'll use for the wall itself. The smaller ones we'll use for riprap behind the wall. Pretty simple set of stairs on the north side of the property, 4 feet wide in accordance with the town specs. And that's an overview of the project. I don't know if you guys have questions, or if Gail wants to speak.
How long is this wall, Chris?
The frontage is 300 feet, so it's pretty much that entire frontage, so 300 feet.
All right,
I mean, it's probably stopped short a couple feet in the north side. There's actually an existing large boulder that abuts the north property line that we're actually able to key into, which will actually work out very well.
You say both abutting properties have the same wall?
The abutting properties on this do not. I think Cooper's is 2 south, is it, Andy?
I wasn't here for that one.
Okay, I think 2 south, and then as you go north along Shelburne Bay, there's got to be six of them. And actually, even when you hit the South Burlington line, I know we've done a bunch in South Burlington also.
So that was my question, was gonna be, how are you gonna kind of terminate these or knit them into the adjacent property?
Well, all work will be done on this property, so we'll not be doing any work on the adjacent properties.
Okay.
On the north side of the property, we'll actually tie these, not tie them, we'll butt the rocks up to that large boulder. So it'll provide a solid interface there. And then on the south side, we'll extend it down to the property line, and then what we do is we normally just key that back into the bank. So it'll be that natural transition. Similar to what we've done on pretty much all of the projects, unless the neighbors show an interest where we can key the 2 walls together, which we've done north.
You're talking keying back in, are you angling it back on the south?
Yeah, what they'll do is they'll actually, but you won't, we're showing the fascia rock, they'll actually turn one rock and tie it back into the bank. And like I said, they're all natural rocks, so it's not like it's a concrete wall. So they basically fit the rocks, and the contractors, the work that we've seen has been phenomenal. In this instance, the stone's a little bit lighter than some of the other walls we've done, but the contractor, they will be trying to match that stone as close as possible with any stones that we bring in. Obviously, each quarry is a little different, and each vein in each quarry is a little different, but we'll certainly make sure the contractor will try to match that as close as possible.
So what color are these? I mean, you've done
It's
some before where they're like a light brown or a
Yeah,
light blue.
we've done them all over. I mean, in the rocks, whether you get it from a lot of the walls we've done has actually come from the Whitcomb quarry, which is almost more like a reddish brown. It's a little brighter colored. These are more of a gray, and so you can actually. It's interesting. Certain quarries, there are different veins. So,
Do you think this is New Haven, or you don't know?
to be honest with you, I was talking to Steve Bach about it earlier. There's a quarry in Milton that we recently just did when they built McKay's, I believe. And it actually matches this a little closer. It also depends upon the contractor a little bit, because different contractors have different rights to different quarries. So I'm not sure, this hasn't necessarily been awarded yet to a particular contractor, is my understanding. So depending upon the contractor, they might, like there's different ones in New Haven and Canton, and one quarry may use New Haven, one quarry may use Canton, but we can achieve the same color. And the goal is to obviously match it as close as possible.
Okay.
So my concerns about this project are, I've raised before with other seawalls, is that when you build seawalls, you generally promote erosion to the adjoining properties that don't have seawalls. And I see that this particular spot, both the property to the north and the south, doesn't have a seawall similar to what you're building here.
Yeah.
And additionally, if the Shoreland Protection Act goes through, you may be able to get to build your wall, but the residents down the road may not be able to do anything that would remedy a situation if they start to encounter more erosion. So my concerns are I would want to do a site visit, number one, and number two, I would want a really a good picture of exactly what you're proposing. A front-on view as you would see it from the lakeside.
Okay. To answer a couple questions. One, in terms of the view, we've done numerous, I don't know how many in Shelburne now, of these walls. I think generally, and we've done a bunch for the town itself. So it's not like it's just for private properties. It's also for the town of Shelburne. We've had very good luck. In regards to the velocities and all that, there's always been the concern that if you have a wall with no interruptions and you have a smooth face where the wind, none of that energy is transferred, that can pose more of an issue. If you had a concrete retaining wall with this is a natural stone wall, so there's voids. Each rock, it's not like it's a linear wall. They do their best. We've not seen that issue where it transfers the energy. In terms of erosion, sediment, and all that, our opinion from all the properties we've done, this is a significant benefit. If you look at properties that do not have some level of erosion and protection on the shoreline, they're significantly eroded. I went to one with Annie out at the point this past summer, and there's 30-inch trees that are completely undermined. This was natural vegetation, it was shale, and it's completely eroded. In terms of trying to vegetate a property like this, we don't foresee how you can do that. And certainly to vegetate this with the wave action we're seeing on these properties, this has been the best product that we've seen in regards to offsetting visual impacts, maintaining the character of the shoreline, and also eliminating erosion. And right now, there's sediments that are being washed out, there's boulders that are being washed out, and as time goes on, these properties, there's just more and more erosion. So our feeling is by installing a wall like this, it's in terms of environmental, it's a benefit. I know the state is looking at different options. None of that has been passed at this point, and I think long term, that's something they're going to have a hurdle that the state's going to have to. When they adopt policies, this shoreline erosion is a huge concern, and to do it with vegetation is just difficult. When you have shorelines like Shelburne Point, where they're losing. I know Dick mentioned earlier, like a river where you're losing feet and yards and 20, 30 feet. We're seeing the same thing along the lake, and short of armoring it like this, to hold back that soil, it's difficult without the mass of a rock like what we're finding.
So other than the, existing riprap that's been moved by wave action, has this property lost significant portions of soil?
My understanding is that there's actually been a significant amount of sediment pulled out from underneath the rock. So the wave action, the constant waves hitting that and pulling the sediments out, is pulling all the sediments out, and the wall's actually settling. So yeah, there's been a lot of sediment that's being dragged back out, and it's consistent with what we're seeing with other properties. And we're seeing that. I mean, when we had that high water all along the main lake and also in Shelburne Bay, it affected numerous properties, and this has been a solution that we've implemented that's worked great. Did I answer that, or?
Well, my two comments, that I still would like to do a site visit, and I'd like to see an image of, a forward-looking view of the wall as proposed from the lake. It's really hard to tell just from these plats exactly what this is going to look like compared to the adjacent properties.
Okay. I mean, my only concern though is that that's not been a requirement for the other walls. This is very similar to those walls, consistent with what the town's done.
The McKay wall, is that finished? I don't know if this is helpful, but if you could pull up and look at one of the ones that they've done to see what it looks like.
Yeah, and we have
There's a
in
lot of
some
examples.
instances submitted renderings
Do you have an image from an existing wall like this that you've built?
that we submitted to town, absolutely.
Do we have that handy?
Yeah, you can pull,
A completed wall image? I was thinking more just Google Earth, but I don't think we have any photographs of.
Yeah, we looked at one a couple,
yeah, but we've done it.
it was on,
See, I wanna
I
say
thought we
Jan-
looked at one on Ordway Shore.
I was
where
gonna say
there
Jansen property
was
on Ordway
photographs
Shore.
of the adjacent property.
For Jansen, I think we did a rendering. I don't know how quick it takes to pull that folder.
I can do that. Is that something you're interested in seeing?
I mean, I think the general aesthetics of this is gonna be 100% consistent with, probably 6 or 7 properties along this side of Shelburne Bay, and also a significant property just over the South Burlington line. It's also consistent with several properties on Shelburne Point, in addition to one the town did right adjacent to Harbor Road.
Now, we approved 3 of these in October, if I
You
remember
did,
right.
same
exact structure.
Same exact thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, the letter, the submittal is the exact same thing we've been submitting because it works. If we had seen results that were not working, we would have submitted something different. But
Based on my view of the sections is you've got, you're taking, what's that roughly, Chris, about 12 feet of armor stone and basically standing it on its nose, for lack of a better term, and
Exactly.
doing 2 tiers to try to absorb the energy and stabilize.
And it's actually only 2 tiers where the stairs are. The majority of it is actually just a
A
single
single
tier.
tier, right,
Yep.
that's true too.
Yep, and the top walls at 105, we've actually dropped that a little bit lower than what we normally do at the point, just because the wind and waves aren't quite as strong. Normally we'll go to 106.
In my opinion, if you take a look at that, the top of that, if this is accurate, the top of that armor stone is at like 106, 105?
Yep.
Existing, going all the way down to the edge of the lake and then some, down to below 92. So you've got 10 vertical feet of wall there exposed, and you're gonna end up with 97, 104, 105, less than that, like 8 feet.
Yeah, 6 or 7 feet. We can't go below 98.
You can't go below 98.
So 98 to
So,
105.
yeah, I mean, that was my observation when I looked at it. You're basically taking and minimizing the visual impact, sitting in a boat or across the lake. And, if you're seeing signs of, erosion under those rocks, that problem's not gonna go away.
It is, yeah. And like I said, I mean, I know, that everybody wants to think that, we can do it with vegetation. It doesn't work. And the shoreline, we're seeing, like I said out on the point, we're dealing with 30-inch trees that are completely eroded. And it's a never-ending process until you essentially armor that shoreline.
There were
Speaking of 30-inch trees, could we put like 6 of them across here? No, we can't. But I'd like to see, I think, the presentation of this thing to the lake is kind of horrible, that clear cut. And I wondered if we could get maybe 6 trees that will grow into something. I'm not talking about putting huge trees in now, but something, I don't know, you probably have a much better idea, sycamores or oaks or something, to give them a start. I don't want to block the house or block the views of the house.
Yeah.
But strategically place them on top somewhere where they'll kind of break it up a little bit. It's pretty.
We can't just say, put some trees in there, because we'd like to see them. If it's a
It's
requirement.
not because we like to see them, it's
what's
landscaping.
What's the purpose of the trees then?
Landscaping.
Okay.
Like we require landscaping on the other side, even though it's a railroad. And I'm not asking for a great deal, I'm just looking to break it up, and I think if we thought about, a lot of the ones that we see have heavy growth on them already, so the walls tend to blend in more. But this one, all it's gonna be is like a wall and a big blank field.
But we aren't changing anything. We aren't trimming landscaping. We aren't cutting.
You're not gonna see it from there, but you're welcome.
Afterwards, Dick, can you pass that down?
There's actually a photo of that. Annie has a photo of that. I think the same image on both sides.
Yeah, it's on the staff report.
Same one. It's hard to see though, the black
I
and
know,
white.
we don't have color copy.
You gotta touch the screen every.
So Andy, this property does kind of stand out. Do we have anything in our ordinance that talks about a vegetative buffer on the lake shore? Or why is this one particular property not having a vegetative buffer when both properties to the north and south do?
These lots were clear cut when the original developer bought them. It was like 25 years ago.
They're
There's still
individually owned lots.
There's
that-
still vegetation to the,
There's a restriction against
To the
cutting
north
there
and the
now, but
south.
it's not, if it's already done, it is
stone
what it
stone,
is.
yeah.
And there is some, if you look at our site plan, there is some brush out there. There's some landscaping.
Some scrubby white pine.
Yeah, but like I said, we aren't proposing to change anything.
It's more of a request on my part.
Thank you, Dick.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Gail, you're all set?
I think that the concerns of the Natural Resources Committee have been pretty much covered by the conversation that's gone on so far. And were stated pretty well by Bill. Our concern was, for one, the impact of the wall on adjacent properties. Through this conversation, this is not something we discussed at the committee, but I wonder if there is any way that you can, I don't know what you use inside the structure that you're building to take the place of the soil that's washed out, but I imagine that you're using some smaller riprap or some kind of...
Yeah, we actually have a detail. So we key in the larger rocks along the front, and then behind the wall, we actually use a riprap material. It's like a 5-inch minus. In this instance, we're gonna reuse all the rocks that are on site, that we can reutilize. So the larger rocks we place at the front, and the smaller diameter rocks will be used in the back.
Yeah, but I wonder if there are any vegetation types that would fit within the crevices of the wall and that could take root there, that would hold some of that stuff behind, from silting out from underneath or otherwise through their root systems?
There's actually a filter fabric, and the wall also has a geogrid, so it's tied in. So we remove the unstable material, and then we key in the lower course, we put fabric on the back, and we put riprap. We've not seen that mitigation of any fines coming through the walls. The contractors that, when we do the inspections, they use large rocks. They also take smaller rocks, and they actually, push those into all of the gaps in between the walls. So they basically make a structure where we've not seen any sediment come out through that.
But you did say that you had concerns because you weren't able to go below the 98-foot line?
Yeah.
That there would be undermining that would continue, or did I misunderstand that?
No, the existing rocks are being undermined currently because there's nothing holding out. So what's happening is as the wave action goes in, the waves hit, and as the water recedes, it's pulling the fines. And it basically settles the wall. So there's pockets where the wall's just settling. So by doing this, we're actually keying it in, so we're creating a barrier where the wave's not gonna get underneath. And by using the fabric and the riprap behind, there's no fines for the water to pull back. And it's the same design we've done on, I don't know how many walls our office has designed. And we've had excellent luck. So it's one of those things where we've used it in Shelburne, we've used it for homeowners, we've used it for the town. Everybody aesthetically and the functionality of these walls has been excellent. So it's something where we haven't found a better solution, and we haven't found a solution to change it. So we're keeping it consistent, and they've been working very well.
Thank you.
So, it's certainly, you can, make a motion to do a site visit if you want to, Bill, and see if it carries.
I'd like to make a motion that we do a site visit for this Friday, right after the site visit that we already have scheduled, and just swing by this property afterwards. I don't know if anybody else has any.
That's okay with the homeowner, or?
I don't know. I'd have to check on that just to I would think it would be. The only question I would have is, if we make the site visit on Friday, is there any way at the next meeting, assuming that this was approved, because if it was approved tonight, Andy would draft up the conditions of approval and you guys would sign it in 2 weeks. If it's not approved tonight and we make a site visit on Friday, is there any way that it could be approved and signed in 2 weeks? And the only reason I ask that, assuming it's approved, the only reason I ask that is because of the weather we're having. Normally, all of these shoreline projects are constructed during the winter time. The ground is frozen, there's almost no disturbance, there's no sediment, there's no erosion. We don't have the ruts when they bring the trucks in, the excavators. And we're getting, with the appeal period, and then also pull in the building permit with that appeal period. I just don't want to push this back another month if that's an option. And I know in the past we have.
I would be happy, I can write a draft decision, which we've done past cases, and have it ready to sign pending your approval at the next meeting. So essentially, the board would vote to approve and sign it on the same night. My other just added comment is that I understand that there's some concerns about the seawalls, and they've kind of evolved. But the way the regulations are written, unfortunately, they don't really give a lot of design and discretion. It's pretty much dependent on the engineers to certify that the wall is built or the best solution. And I think it's a little bit having site visits for some and not for others. Like, I understand these aren't boilerplate applications, each one should be treated separately, but it just seems, I don't see the criteria different
And
some of the other ones. And I'm not saying that that's my opinion, I'm just pointing that out.
I want to go on record as saying, we've done enough of these. I grew up in a lake, I built seawalls, this works. If somebody can show me a vegetative solution that has been built in the last 5 or 10 years that's worked, and was able to stabilize a bank like this through some extraordinary and not so extraordinary weather, I'll be glad to listen, but I don't see it happening, so. And I'm not in favor of doing a site visit and holding this up, so.
I look at the same thing. I think I can't see any purpose where we'd gain anything by a site visit. The plans is what we've gone by in the past. I don't see where it's worth going out there myself. I don't know what we'd accomplish by doing it, so I'm opposed to it myself also.
So, points moved.
I think so. So then, would anybody like to make a motion to either continue or approve this hearing? I myself, in the interest of 10:30, I'll make a motion to approve this, to direct staff to prepare a decision indicating approval of this application CU 1402, with the condition added that besides those that are included 1 through 4 in here, that number 5, the contractor and property owner take into consideration their neighbor's request and not park any construction vehicles or equipment or materials on
Mariners Way.
Mariners Way, Mariners Cove, Mariners Way, I always lose track, so.
As-built?
Hmm?
You getting as-built still?
I believe we are getting a letter.
We submitted a certification post-construction certifying that the wall was built by PE in accordance with the design.
Per the plans.
We have not, the requirement's not to submit an as-built from our experience, but we just do a certification letter.
And I believe the board discussed the as-bills at the,
Yeah, you'd have to redesign.
yeah.
So, anyways, I would make that motion.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you for your patience, gentlemen. Item number 11.
What?
2 nights in a row, or 10 days.
This is a pre-application conference with Trudell Consulting Engineers on behalf of Robert and Deborah Gerwitz for a 2-lot rural PUD to include a single-family home on a 10-acre lot and 1 additional 3.5-acre building lot. This property is at 157 Shelburne Heinsberg Road and is located in the rural district.
I'll try to be brief so we can get home.
Okay.
Jeremy Matosky, Trudell Consulting Engineers. I'm here with Bob Gerwitz. And Bob and his wife Deborah own a...
Oh, sorry about that.
Can you swear him in?
Keep it right down the road.
Bob and Deborah Gerwitz own approximately 14-acre lot at the intersection of Shelburne Heinsberg Road and Dorset Street, if you're familiar with that area. Palmer Sugar House is off just to the east here. This map's oriented north up. It's a triangular shaped lot. It was a part of a subdivision back in the 90s where it was a rectangle that was split into basically 2 triangles. And our proposal is a simple single new lot. We're proposing to utilize it's in the rural district. We're proposing to utilize the PUD section of the rural district rules in order to create a better house siting and lot configuration and maintain existing natural resources on the property. We've gone basically through the sketch plan criteria and identified areas of steep slopes greater than 15%, and those show up on this map in a yellow sort of shade. The contours are the yellow lines, and then we have these blue shaded areas which represent the wetlands as mapped as undevelopable land in accordance with the bylaw. So between the two, the blue and the yellow shading, we still have over 10 acres of developable land. Therefore, we're able to propose to construct 1 new home on this property. And what we're proposing to do is a 3.5-acre building lot with frontage on Shelburne Heinsberg Road, this blue representation of the lot line. And then we'd like to propose a building envelope in this area here where there's a black rectangle. And that house site right now is primarily overgrown meadow, some bigger brush, There's really no large vegetation in the area. So the back of the property has some larger, more, I wouldn't say forest, but certainly larger shrubs and larger wooded growth. The existing home is here and is very well vegetated, screened from, although it's still visible from Shelburne Heinzer Road, there's nice existing vegetation around that home. And then this pink shaded area is what we're proposing to provide as a conservation easement, which would meet the criteria for 33% of the original acreage being dedicated to a permanent easement for conservation, which is consistent with sort of the environmental constraints on this property, where there's wetlands on the lower portion and then a buffer to the steep slopes. No construction anywhere near the steep sloped area. And then what we're proposing is a single new driveway, shared access, single point access, and then just Y off and provide both homes off of the same driveway. So it's a very simple proposal, drilled well and on-site septic. Any questions?
I don't think this meets the criteria. I believe it has to be a 5-acre lot.
So it does. You have to have 5 acre, the density calculation is 10 acres of developable land.
My point is that we're creating a non-conforming lot in an area that's.
No, it's a plan unit development.
PUD.
I understand that, but I read the PUD and I don't recall.
Actually, we just did one on the other side of Shelburne Heinzer Road for the Lugis, and that was a 1 acre lot. So in the plan unit development rural district, you're allowed to use the 5 acre density calculation to create no more than 2 lots. And then you're allowed to have a smaller lot and a larger lot. And that's consistent with prior subdivisions that I've done in the rural district. And I think several have been done that way. So I understand what you're saying. Normally 10 acres, you'd split it in half, 5 acres. And if this was conventional subdivision, we would have to do that under the rural section of PUD.
I read there, and I didn't get sold on it. I tried to find rationale for that, and I did not see it.
And the intent is to have flexibility so that we can create,
It doesn't really indicate that you can have a smaller sized lot. It does, my understanding of PUD is it allows you to put your lots together, but not to make smaller lots. You still need to, this lot still needs 5 acres. So you can create a PUD and you need 10 acres of developable land, and you could put the lot out somewhere, but you need to use 10 acres. If you're doing you need to have a 5 acre commitment for that lot. I don't see.
Give me a minute.
Section is that again?
I think it's
It's
3. I'm not sure, was the PRD is where, is it 10? 1330,
right?
1930.6, plan unit development, rural mixed use.
1936.
I mean, and just in general, plan unit developments that I've done throughout the state, the intent is to have flexibility over the conventional zoning. So you typically have smaller lot sizes with plan unit developments in a residential development. But
I would agree with that, but I would also agree that PUDs are meant to not just promote flexibility or to bypass subdivision regulations, but to take into account natural features that you want to preserve.
Correct.
Or to do creative housing like a concentrated community while preserving a lot of open space.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do here is respect the natural environment on this property and utilize the portion of developable upland to create a single new home.
And you're also really just creating, a 2-lot subdivision here. You're calling it a PUD, but it's really a 2-lot subdivision. And that's
correct, consistent with the regulations.
Rural.
I believe. And the only reason I'm so strongly believing of that is because we've already done one of these in district.
I believe it's in the rural,
Well, I
district
sat
section, it
when
says,
they made this rule, and this was not the intent of the rule.
it says that the
may be
dimensional
way that you can
requirements may be
interpret it,
modified.
But I don't, it's nothing that sells me on it. The rule was written so that if you had 30 acres or 40 acres, you could cluster your houses on a 30-acre lot. If you had 6 houses, you'd cluster them on a 30-acre lot. And you'd have a buffer, but that allowed you to put your resources together, shorter driveways. That was the point of the PUD. It was not to allow a 3-acre and a 10-acre lot. And in my estimation, this is basically by creating a 10-acre lot, we're gaming the system and creating the potential for another subdivision, another 5-acre lot. That's the only purpose.
No, because there's only 10 acres of, there's like 11 and a half acres of developable land, so unless you reduce the density to less than 5 acres, we couldn't do that. And we're giving up a 6 acres of conservation easement that could never be built on. So I feel
I
like.
guess I would ask, why wouldn't you just increase another acre and a half?
And not provide the conservation easement? That would
Well,
be.
the conservation easement is a swamp. It's underwater. It's not, there's nothing that could be done there anyway. I drive by there every day.
No, I'm familiar with the property, I'm just, you're right, I mean,
It's a floodplain. It can't be.
it's not a floodplain, actually mapped as a floodplain, but it does
So
flood.
that being said,
It isn't.
what's the advantage one way or the other of having a 3 or a 5-acre lot? If it's a
Well,
small.
because the district is a 5-acre district.
But it, 30, well, this is, I think, maybe the language referring to, it's 330.2E is minimum lot sizes may be modified per the provisions of section 1930.3 and 1930.6 of the regulations. And that's referring to the PUD.
330.2?
Yes, it's in the rural district dimensional requirements, section 330. It specifically says the minimum lot size for single-family dwelling is 5.0 acres. Minimum lot sizes may be modified per the provisions of section 1930.3 and 1930.6.
But still the density is based on the development.
Exactly.
So that's why we're proposing a smaller lot and just retaining the larger lot for the balance of the existing property. So it's just a 10-acre lot and a 3.5-acre lot, as opposed to, 5 and the balance. 8 or 9, so.
So if you were to do a straight subdivision here,
still don't
rather
see
than
it.
a PUD,
You're saying 330.
if you,
.2?
if you take into account the developable area requirement, which is a requirement in the rural district,
Says it may
would you be able to
modified.
get to
Doesn't say they have to
buildable
be.
lots?
Nope.
It's
A
up
Two
to
straight
5-acre
subdi-
lot, that doesn't come into play. The lot size is just based on, as I said, under the planning and development, we could go lower than 5 acres as long as we don't create more than 2 lots. In terms of the developable area, that doesn't change. That's predicated based on the existing features on the existing current parcel.
Guaranteed.
So, there's approximately 11 and a half acres of developable land on that parcel as defined in the regulation. So we can create up to 1 new lot and retain the existing home. It is conceivable that we could have a 5-acre lot and then a balance of the land, and that's something I could talk to
But
the
the
homeowner
5-acre
about. But what we thought, and it's been previously done by other subdivisions in the rural district, was, to create a lot less than 5 acres, still a reasonable sized lot, I feel, which is why we proposed it, 3.5 acres, and no more than the density that's allowed in the district. And I feel that, under the PUD regulations, there's some flexibility, but it also comes with some benefits in terms of
1330.
a requirement for conservation.
.2.
So, that's why we're here, to get feedback from the board and see how you perceive this application, whether you feel this is a good place. I think the pre-application actually talks about house siting. We felt that this was the best place on the property for this home. And obviously the back of the lot would be less appropriate. Up here on the east side is slightly more visible, it's more elevated land. And this is a little bit, blends into the landscape a little better. And was closer to where we were going to put our H field. So,
I still don't see anything that says that this is that makes this
Well, it is a may, it's up to the board's discretion to allow this. But it's been done in the past, and this is, any of the provisions for the PUD that allow kind of the relief from some of the zoning regulations in the district are all discretional.
I mean, essentially what would happen is if you require that we go back and make this a 5-acre lot, we'd probably look to see if we would, eliminate the PUD, eliminate the easement, and just make it a 5-acre lot.
But you'd have to have a 5-acre lot that has 5 acres of developable land.
That's not how the zoning reads.
It's
The density needs to be, it doesn't have to be 5 acres.
It's not per
of new
lot, it's per the
developable-
total parcel being divided. You'd have to, so they do have 10 acres of developable land, so they'd be able to divide that.
But then the
into
new lot
lots.
doesn't have to have 5 of those.
No.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Not my
I would prefer
understanding.
to see a 5-acre lot. I don't believe the PUD was created for this purpose. The PUD was really so that you could, again, as I said before, if you had 50 acres, you could put 10 acres in a cluster and build them, but you still have the 50 acres dedicated to the subdivision.
Well, Dick, you can take it back to the board and rewrite it next time you rewrite it.
Well, I agree with
I didn't write it the
Firm up
first time,
the,
but I did
firm up
sit
the
through-
language.
I did sit through when they did it.
Oh,
I wasn't on
yeah.
board then.
I understand, but,
Can I speak?
certainly.
My name is Bob Gerwitz. I own the land with my wife. We've been there since '97. We built a house. And I think at this point, it's just a question of semantics. We're not trying to, do anything strange or different. There's about 11 and a half acres there of developable land, and we could certainly carve off 5 acres and keep the rest for our current home. But we thought that based on what Jeremy had said about the PUD, that we could carve off some of that land, and it would, and how did you term it as far as the town is concerned, a conservation easement?
Correct. When I read the regulation for PUD, and the only reason I proposed it to Bob, like I said, we could have just done the straight 5, was I felt that, in fact, we're meeting, all the setbacks for conventional subdivision. I don't think we're asking for any other waivers other than the lot size. And it was simply just based on this parcel that we felt like it made sense to retain the larger piece with the existing home and create this new lot that, laid out just fine. But again, I felt like the regulations do support that, and we've done this previously. So it's a news to me that this isn't how the board currently interprets that regulation, but like I said, it would be just as easy to go back and talk to Bob about a different alignment of this line, and then we would be off to the races with a 5-acre lot and a...
Well, we just did, the planning commission did a fairly interpretive session of 3 or 4 meetings talking about this very item, which is why it's quite familiar to me.
Now, quite frankly, I mean, it
And
could be a 1-acre lot. I don't know that there's any, I mean, like I said, the subdivision that was done on Dorset Street, just around the corner, was a 1-acre lot.
Just one, and I think that was like a 10 or 15 acre lot.
Yeah, we were over 12, something like that, and created and again, I'm looking at it in terms of preserving as much of the character of the area as we can, and just siting these houses appropriately, and not exceeding the density that's allowed.
For me, I wouldn't vote for this, and it is up to the DRB to interpret how they're going to do it.
I agree with Dick completely on this, and I've been at those planning commission meetings, and this has become a significant issue. And I would argue that if you created a 1-acre lot in the rural district, then...
I wasn't aware of it.
Then I wasn't aware of it either, and I think we
that.
seriously misapplied the rules if this board did that prior to me being here. I mean, it's a rural district. I mean, that's why we have...
That's why we have a 5-acre district.
Exactly.
So the PRD is...
And when we created that 1-acre lot, we created a 10-acre conservation easement. So it wasn't like we were circumventing the rules. But regardless, like I said, I think the pre-application hearing purpose was to get your feedback. Can we, if we propose a change that this becomes a 5-acre lot, then does the board have additional feedback for us as we go into engineering and design and permitting?
just for my own edification, if this, the overall piece of property, the size is not gonna change. And help me out here that when you drive by this piece of property, or you fly over it, or do whatever you do, or look at it on a map, whether the lot size is 1 acre, or 3.5 acres, or 5 acres, is that really gonna change? How's that gonna change the character
rural
of it?
area is wet, and this map shows that. And
Well,
that's
I don't
why we
thi- I
went
don't-
to 5
I don't think you
acres.
can say categorically the whole rural area is wet.
Generally, the soils are poor, and that is one of the reasons why the PUD was done, so that they could congregate houses
Okay.
on the good soils, but it didn't lessen the requirement for the property size, the PUD. So that is what is meant by reducing the size of the lot. You don't have to have a 5-acre lot to put your house here, but you do have to still have a congregate area.
It's
So
not a-
you can't just reduce, if you're building 3 houses, you still have to have 15 acres. It's just that you can build them on smaller footprints.
My point exactly is,
But you still need a 15-acre lot
right,
that's dedicated to those. So this, if you were doing,
Dick, this
if you
is
did
a
7
This
acres.
is a 14-acre lot now, we're gonna create 2 lots.
right.
So a classic example
And there's-
of what Dick is saying
Hang
here.
on one second, let me just finish this thought if you don't mind. And is there an advantage to the town, and the neighboring, the abutting property owners, and in general, is there an advantage to having a conservation easement as opposed to doing a straight subdivision in the long term? That's a question.
Do you think,
That's why I
do you think if this lot was
a
5
discussion
acres, it
point.
would make any difference to this wetland?
No, I don't, that's my point, I don't think it matters whether the wetland, if it's 5 acres or,
So this is where we run into problems, is when we set a precedent, when we grant a variance, which we're not allowed to do, or we make changes or push things through, that becomes a precedent that people lean on. And that's why I believe this area is
but the
supposed to be 5
but
acre
the
lots.
language in the current document that you guys wrote, that was written, that we have to adjudicate, says that we may make that change.
We may,
Right.
and we may not.
And we may not, so,
But
I'm not saying that we're gonna do that, I'm not saying I'm advocating for it one way or the
Mhm.
other, so I'm just saying,
I'm curious.
seeing as how you're on the
I
planning
am
commission, Dick,
too, and
that you can go right back
I
and
will bring it
put
up.
it on the,
I will bring
put
it
it
up.
on there.
I'm very
We
curious.
have to adjudicate the rules that are in the book. And,
Because that's not,
you know,
it's just
whether
not
it
the way
was
we
the
interpret
intent,
it
but
when
if,
it was.
Dick, if it was, it doesn't matter. What you think and what your interpretation was, you know, if you weren't
hasn't
here
changed.
tonight, we've gotta adjudicate the way it's written. And the way his attorney, or our attorney, or any attorney is gonna interpret it, so. And I'm not advocating one way or the other, I'm just trying to make a
No,
point.
I'm very curious, because like I
Trying
said,
to make a point that-
I was kind of surprised by that, because I just assumed that that's how it was already previously interpreted, because there's been previous approvals. But regardless, on this particular property, I think what we need to leave with is a sense of, you know, do we have, if we take the PUD off the table and we draw the line at 5 acres,
Mhm.
is this board comfortable with me going back and spending more of Bob and Deb's money to try to develop this property?
And the conservation easement goes away.
Under this, I don't believe it's required if we go to 5 acres.
It's not, I don't
Okay,
think so either.
so my question is, I'm
Oh, I
looking
don't
for,
have a
is there,
problem with
is there
this.
advantage to having a conservation easement?
My take is that,
And I would ask Annie one other procedural question. If we go to straight subdivision, does it drop back to minor and 1 hearing
It would be 2, it would be sketch and final,
instead of PUD, which would be 3, right?
yes.
So that's good feedback. I think that would maybe streamline the process.
So I wouldn't mind getting the board's input on that. Do you think there's an advantage to having a conservation easement in a case like this?
1330.2E.
That's the way I look at it, as long as it's, to me, as long as we're doing something that can be interpreted as it's doing correct.
Sorry, 330.2.
I think that looks
It's
like
in the
a
rural
nice plan
district,
for
the very
myself, and
beginning.
have that easement in there, that's what I'd go for. I mean, the conservation,
No,
myself.
I mean, to Dick's point, it's provided because it's required under the rural PUD, and it's not developable land, so it's not like we're gonna come, whether it's there or not, I'm not
And
sure
I don't
that-
know, I mean, does it give you any advantages to have a conservation easement on your property? That's a question.
Like I said, the reason I proposed PUD in the first place was the flexibility in the lot size. The conservation easement is a requirement of the PUD. The reality is, whether we provide this or not, isn't going to change how that property is utilized, and I think that was Dick's point, so that's a point well taken.
It's basically saying it gets put
If
into
the
a
landowner
PUD,
doesn't have a problem
maybe
going
not,
to a
they may
5-acre
qualify.
design and it simplifies the process, I'm not opposed to it. Again, I only proposed it because I felt that that's how it was previously interpreted, and that we wanted smaller lots so that people don't have a 5-acre lot where they can do whatever they want on it.
So the conservation easement is basically unbuildable land, so to really, I think that's an insignificant portion here. But for this to function the way a PUD is intended, this house would be built closer to the other house, and then most of the land would be preserved. Whereas this really looks to me just like a subdivision, except that you're calling it a PUD and you don't have a property line breaking it in half. PUD
But
is an elected.
is there anything in our regulations, Bill, that say you did a PUD and you chopped this into 6.5 and 5 acres? Is there anything that says that you have to cluster those homes together?
Not cluster per se,
If that's what you're telling me is the objective of that.
And I would need to read the definition of a PUD as written in our ordinance, but in general, PUDs are created to use land efficiently and to preserve natural features, and to cluster housing, to allow setbacks to be waived so that you can get an attractive application. Where there's nothing on this proposal that demonstrate any of that. It's basically just being used to subdivide a property and create an additional building lot. And I would have to be a proponent of a straight subdivision if you could do this rather than a PUD.
I gotta say, I think I'm leaning towards Dick and Bill's contention as well. I think the conservation easement is a moot issue since it's not buildable anyway.
I don't know, I mean, it's a question on my part, I don't know if there's any advantage to the property owner, to the town, to have a conservation easement in this case, and I'm not gonna say I disagree that,
The property
I
owner's
think
jurisdiction.
it's really a moot point whether you chopped it in half and did a 5-acre and 6.5-acre PUD.
Yeah.
And just
it'll
increase
be
the
more like
lot
5 and
size.
8, but that's fine.
It's gonna save you a meeting is what it's gonna save you if you do it as a subdivision.
It wouldn't be a PUD then if it was a 5-acre or 6.5 acre because it's 5-acre zoning.
Correct.
No, but if you go through the regulations, the general
Well, I think
requirements.
what you guys did is illustrate an issue in our zoning ordinance
I
that
learned something.
may need to be addressed, so.
All right, so,
If that's
in
the
terms of the house
intention,
siting, the board doesn't have any concerns?
I'd still, Jeremy, I'd love to be convinced. I can't find anything in here that references it. But I do, I have no problem with the 5-acre part of it.
Okay. Well, we'll proceed with that, and, if there's any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you very much. So then, another kind of procedural question, we have 2 items on the ballot because PUD required 2 hearings. Right, or a pre-hearing and then a sketch hearing. Aren't we on the ballot twice, or aren't we on the agenda twice?
for tonight we are, yeah.
Yes. I was just recommended to continue because I misinterpreted that as thinking we could do them both. Remember we talked about that for the sketch plan? I originally had said that we could maybe skip the pre-conference.
Right.
And I was mistaken.
Okay, so we have to do that.
Yes,
That is-
and rather than, I'd already warned it, so that if you want to come back, I don't think, if you wanted to change it, we would just note that it's already been warned as a PUD, but if you wanted to come back just for a straight subdivision sketch plan, we would not need to rewarn
So
that.
our continuance will be for next time for sketch.
Yes.
Okay.
Sketch is a subdivision, straight subdivision.
I guess just to, one more piece, it's listed in the staff report is the design process for a PUD in a residential PUD in a rural district. It doesn't say anything about the lot size, but it says those are the criteria for the PUD. And it talks about the house siting. I don't know if that's something.
Which one's that?
It's in the staff report. It's 1930.3B. with the design process for PUD R in a rural district, and it basically discusses this pre-application conference, which this is right now, and lists the criteria.
Annie, what section is that again?
1930.3B. I mean, a lot of this PUD language is vague and kind of open to interpretation. But it seems to me, reading that, those are the criteria for
1930.3.
1930.3B.
Generally, the PUD that I was talking about was, what this is driving towards is to encourage, you get a 50-foot buffer surrounding the property, you get to bring the houses together, put them in one location, you get to share resources such as septic, water. You don't have to draw lines all across, and he keeps land open.
Okay.
I was reading, planned unit development, rural mixed use, that's not what this is it?
No,
So that's moot anyway.
Okay.
no, this is not rural mixed use. 1930.3.
Oh.
I don't know.
But a PUD would affect the siding of the house, but whether this is a subdivision or a PUD, the siding stays the same.
Correct.
So.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get another crack at you for sketch, and we'll do some reading, and
I'm just digging, and I'm gonna be talking to actually one of the guys that wrote this, I'm gonna ask him.
yep. My point is, Dick, the problem is the intention may be one thing, but when you're sitting here,
Well, I don't,
we gotta,
I think if you.
adjudicate the rules.
I don't think the rule says anything about smaller lots. I still haven't found it. You haven't, I haven't been shown anything that, other than it says you may.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it says.
That's what
It
it
says
says.
But
you
you
may.
can put these two lots in one area. You don't have to put them on two separate 5-acre lots. That's what it's telling you. But you still have to have 10 acres.
It doesn't, all it says is you may adjust lot size. That's it. It stops there.
No.
It has no,
That's all it says.
that's all it says.
Keep this.
Regardless of intent, that is all it says.
That's what it says, and
Definitely needs.
thank you for your patience. All right, we've got a few other things on the agenda here this evening. On the minutes, would anybody like to talk about the minutes, or do we want to postpone those to the next meeting?
So if I could just backtrack for a second.
Let's just hang on a second, we're gonna talk about the minutes first, Bill.
I just wanted to talk about the application we just had. Procedurally, do we have to continue that?
No, we don't. We don't. We would have done that.
It was not, that was a
It was
pre-application.
a pre-application
But
hearing.
wait, but number 12, isn't that part of that
No.
application?
Oh, it is warned. We do have to continue it. That is correct. The second part was warned.
Why did you do this again?
Because I made a mistake.
Oh, okay.
Let's
All right,
tell
then,
everyone.
all right. I'm sorry, Bill.
I know,
Then,
I know.
First one this year, right?
Application SUB 1402, I need a motion to continue, actually, we are continuing that application. I'll make that motion.
Do we have a date on that? We really can't make a
Date
motion without a date.
specifics yet.
Next.
Next meeting's February
February 5th.
5. Somebody like to second that?
Second.
All those in favor? All right. The minutes. So anybody like to talk about the minutes, or do we want to defer these? It's 5 minutes to 11. I would just as soon talk about them at the next hearing.
I didn't participate in the last hearing.
Right.
They looked okay to me, if anybody wanted to approve them.
Do we need a quorum to approve those? Yeah.
I think
Even if
That's right.
because like there was a couple minor things I saw in there, and I just assumed go
Okay.
over them next time around, so.
I'll look them over as well.
Motion to continue, or deferred approval of the minutes to the next meeting.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next item is, we've got a draft decision in front of us for, who do we have tonight?
The Andrew Richardson appeal.
Oh, the appeal, yes. So, I'd like to make a motion or get consensus of the board to go ahead and sign this decision. All those in favor of me signing this decision?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
So was that a motion or a consensus? And if it's a motion.
It's not clear what it is. Nobody's really told me what it is, so you can put it down however you wish.
That's that damn application, that's right.
Okay. Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so who was not?